All right, what's up, everybody? I am here with Nathan from Digital Gnosis, and we have absolutely no plan today. We're probably just going to air our philosophical grievances, but let's give out Lance loot. So JPW gets 1,000 Lance loot, and we'll see who gets the rest.
He says lack of currency, transparency, automatic dislike.
Yeah, so there's no Nathan Nichols this time. We are still keeping the exchange rate a matter of top secrecy. Okay, so the big obvious thing that we have to talk about is the Jordan Peterson thing. And so we both know Danny. Danny has been on our channel. If you haven't seen it, I don't know what rock you're living under, because you're like here to tune in immediately to, or actually, no, wait, people are going to watch this later. Why should I only talk to the people currently in the stream? That's stupid. I'm stupid. Okay, I'm an idiot. Okay, so if you're on YouTube, then you've probably seen the video with Jordan Peterson versus 20 atheists. And one of them is someone that's been a guest on both of our channels before, Danny Phil Talk. You might have seen his channel too. So Danny got invited on there. Other people that are also on YouTube. I know Parker Ian is on TikTok, I think. Is that?
I don't know the TikTok scene
There's
too
a
well.
few people, but I don't know them very well.
Yeah. I did watch an interview with one of the other guests on that, though. That was quite interesting. But a small channel, yeah.
But Danny has gone viral for his response. Should we just play a clip from that? Should we just?
Yeah. Sure, feel free. I think actually he may have uploaded on his own channel a short, like 3-minute thingy. That's like that clip with his commentary. I'm not certain.
Oh yeah, so let's just do that. I think you're right. So we'll just do that, and that'll be for everybody that somehow hasn't seen this. We'll play that, and then we'll say a bit about that, I guess. You're cool with that?
Yeah. If we can get through a 3-minute clip without pausing every 2 seconds, because the comments we got from our last review, where people were very unhappy about our sort of pausing and adding commentary. I mean, yeah, we give a lot of commentary, but I think when we do these sorts of reviews and things as well, it's about like using that. You've said this a lot, like using it as a launch pad to launch this philosophical discussion as well. So no getting mad if we pause videos and comment on them as we do things as well.
Yeah, that's another thing we should address, because I've seen people like when we did the Annika Harris review video, and that was mostly you pausing, but I do it too. Like we pause a lot, and then some people will be like, this isn't how you should do this. This isn't a good way to do things. And, fair enough. For some people, maybe they're like they have like better self-control than you or I, and they plan things out a little more than you or I. They're not very spur of the moment, impulse driven, and that sort of thing for these types of setups. And they might, go through it and have 5 or 6 clips, right? And then they want to go through the clips and then say something about them. So they play the full clip and then they comment. But for me, it's very just play as soon as a thought occurs to me. Sorry?
Your internet might have gone a little bit choppy.
Yeah, it got a little wonky there for a second. Okay. I don't know what's up with that. But it's still doing it. Oh my gosh, are we going to have some kind of technical issue now?
I think you might be. Maybe do you want to try refreshing? I don't think that'll end the stream. I think you'll be good.
Let's find out.
Yeah. I will stay here. Hello, everyone. Mason Colbert in the chat. Vorkozigan, Arangabal. What? I am here in time. I think the double entendre of "you're nothing" was excellent. I think it's good as well because that was clearly incredibly rude.
I'm back.
But hey, you're back.
Yeah, I was mirrored for some reason too, I think.
Oh.
I don't know why.
Okay.
Okay, is it working better now?
Yeah, it seems to be. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Also, why am I like dominating the image? Shouldn't we be like this?
It's all good. You're reviewing Lance Bush reviews Digital Gnosis's existence.
That would be pretty funny, actually. I think there was this time I was reviewing a video that was commenting on me, and then it started playing clips of me in the video, and then I was getting really confused. So I was like, how the hell am I talking? And I was like, wait, I'm reviewing myself. I got so confused listening to myself that I just
I
Oh,
watched
you
one
watched
where
it? Yeah.
I watched one where it was like your video that someone was reviewing, that then like you'd reviewed their review, and then like they'd reviewed on top of it. So it'd be like Lance Bush, then like Lance Bush, then like, and I was like, wait, which Lance is talking? Like,
Right. I got confused. I was like, wait, am I talking? How could I? And then this thought actually went through my head. And then it was like, how the hell would I not know if I was actually talking right now? What kind of idiot? But this is something I
epistemic
do.
privacy proved.
Like, how would I not know? But that thought actually occurred to me. It was so stupid. It's the kind of thing I do. And I did this this week. Like I tell people I do this. I put on my glasses to look for my glasses.
Nice.
I do this multiple times. Like I put them on and I'm like, all right, now that I've got my glasses on, where the hell are my glasses? I could like, and part of my brain is going, good. If you put on your glasses, you'll see better, and that'll help you see where your glasses are. What the hell?
You know that
like I don't have basic object permanence, and objects like one object is its own, it's itself, and it's not in multiple locations.
Do not let Emerson Green get a hold of this clip, because you know what that'll be. That'll be like, this explains why Lance doesn't have the obvious intuition that consciousness exists or qualia exists.
I have just profound neurological damage. I think I don't even know what the problem would be. Okay, so if you put on your glasses to look for your glasses, it's not a lack of like object permanence, right? It's that like
sleepy brain. I think it's probably just you're on autopilot, like sleepy brain. You know, like if you're on autopilot, so you're like, I want to look for something, so you just go like that, but you've not really thought about like what you were doing.
Oh yeah, but you're talking about what's actually going on. I'm talking about the ridiculous quasi-philosophical caricature.
Oh right, yeah. Oh yeah.
So it's like when you don't understand that, like if you eat a cake, that there can no longer be a cake. You can't literally have your cake and eat it.
Yeah.
What I'm doing. I'm taking my glasses, and then I think the glasses are still out there.
Yeah.
Like I don't appreciate that like objects are themselves and they're not other objects.
Yeah.
Some kind of identity issue. Yeah, I don't know.
No, it would be like I was thinking the fact that you seek out your glasses when you're wearing them would be like the way that you deny moral realism when you use moral terms all the time. You use your glasses to look for them.
I did have several people. So, I mean, I do run into these just like weird misunderstandings that I'm sure that the standard critics of moral anti-realism, Mike Humer, Emerson Green, Matthew, all the people that you and I have spoken about, they would make these mistakes, but these mistakes are popular online, and it's kind of like a lot of the dumb mistakes that anti-realists make about realism, and that theists make about atheists, and the atheists make about theists. The one that still bothers me is just everybody misspelling atheist as IEST. That happens a lot. That annoys me. It's not a misunderstanding, but it's just an annoying thing.
Yeah.
But like people will say, I'm an atheist, and then they misspell it. I just come on. It's like someone.
Is that in your like things you're marking or something though a lot, or is it more like, is it online? I guess I'm not seeing a lot of.
Yeah, just online. It's not like student papers. I don't have papers on religion a lot. No, but so you run into these misunderstandings where people will just say stuff that's just like definitely wrong. So people will say stuff like, well, if you're a moral anti-realist, then you deny that there's any truth at all. You think all truth is relative. So your position would be self-undermining because your position would only be true in a relative sense. How do you make that mistake? The view is morality is there are no states-independent moral facts. I'm an anti-realist about morality.
My favorite
I'm
one.
an anti-realist about everything.
I had a particularly funny one in a TikTok live that I joined with some atheists the other day, and it was like, if you deny objective morality, then you've denied the definition of good, so you can't use the word good anymore. Like you literally just can't use the word. Like it doesn't mean anything when you say it. I was like, what?
Yeah, so people pull these kinds of like self-defeat moves. Like they basically accuse you of you have to use the concepts in order to critique the view. So it's impossible to critique the view without affirming the view. So you're always engaged in a kind of performative contradiction. And it's very weird.
It was the definition one that annoyed me the most though, because I was like, they were like, well, here's the definition. And I was like, no, like this is, I don't know where this definition has come from that you're providing me with, but that's a definition. And, I was like, I don't think I have to give you like the definition in order to be able to use a word. So I went, here's how I would characterize it. And they're like, I'm not asking you for a characterization. I want the definition. And I was like, well, I don't think there is a the definition. And then they were like, oh, so you say there's no the definition, but you're still talking and using words.
How can you talk without a the definition?
It was yeah.
I mean, there's so many ways. So I'm always using food examples, but it'd be the same thing like game examples. Like if someone says, "Well, you have to follow the rules," and you're like, "Yeah, but in which game? Like, can I touch the ball or not? It depends if I'm playing soccer or basketball or football or whatever." You have to specify the game. It's the same thing with language. The meaning is going to be based on the context of usage. How is this not obvious? That the meaning is going to change from one context to another, that the intent of the speaker will change from one context to another. It's so weird that this is treated as this will be allowed up to a point when I discuss this sort of thing with philosophers or people in general, but it'll only go so far. Context and intent can only change the meaning so much. There's still this like central unchanged core of meaning. Where did this dogma come from that it became so entrenched that people basically think you're insane if you don't agree with their view on language?
I think it's also just one thing. Is my mic okay from your point of view?
Yeah, sounds fine to me.
Okay, let me know, person in the chat who complained about it. Turn the gain down a little bit, and I have a new mic on the way because I've been getting problems. Yeah, I don't know where this view. I think what it is just an inability for people to like identify what they're actually doing in their metaphilosophy. Like, for example, where they are providing. Oh, great, they say much better now. Where they're providing a sort of explanation of ordinary terms, but the explanandum, the thing that we're taking for granted as an evidence to explain, is the use of the word in language in the first place or something. I think it's just a failure to identify like that kind of method that's being applied, and then getting kind of like lost in the analysis or something.
Yeah, there's something very strange about it though, but part of it has got to be this like weird non-empirical approach that a lot of philosophers take towards language. Mike Humer will speak of all these tests that you could do that will let you know whether this or that particular philosophical theory doesn't work. And it's not like I think that they're totally baseless. So it's not like, I could give you a sentence that's not grammatically well formed and you could go, yeah, there's something wrong with the grammatical structure of that sentence. Ordinary people are pretty good at this. They could judge which sentences are not grammatical or not. They're not so good at telling you what the rules, like why is it not grammatical? People are going to stumble over that. And so the reasoning might go that an analogous ability allows us to judge when there's something off about the usage of this or that sentence when understood in a philosophical context. So we partition off all the pragmatic considerations. We're looking at the pure quote unquote semantics of whatever it is that's being stated. And then we get this like icky vibe about this or that particular interpretation. But whether or not that works, one would presume they would want to initially seek some external corroboration for the efficacy of the armchair method. For the same reason, like let's say there's a doctor that says, look, you describe a patient to me and I'll diagnose them. Now, is there a doctor that's so brilliant that they can do that? Well, maybe, but I wouldn't just grant that they can do that because they said so or something. What I would want to do is cross-reference all their diagnoses to like the physical, like the methods that we use ordinarily to diagnose and see if they match up. And so if philosophers think that they can sit in an armchair and intuit, yeah, people don't use moral claims to express only propositional content because of the Frege-Geach problem. Okay, well, shouldn't we go out and check empirically whether or not that's true? Because in other words, if philosophers want to say we're competent at doing this, the only reason I would believe they're competent at not using the empirical methods to answer empirical questions is if we empirically verify that they don't need to keep constantly running the studies. And they haven't done that. They've never done that. So why should I believe that they're competent at this? It's not an armchair matter whether armchair matters can settle non-armchair questions. It's an empirical question. Whether you see what I'm saying?
Well, I tell you though,
but they haven't done it.
I actually completely agree with you. But then this is just to maybe make that challenge of doing the rigorous empirical investigation even more difficult. Is that then the nature of language? Well, I don't think there is a nature of language. It's kind of like a vapor that you're trying to pin down. And so even what would make the job easier in terms of what you're describing is if there were fixed, say, syntactical grammatical rules that couldn't change, right, over all time. But we know from the study of the etymology of the words we have in our language that, for example, the current, what we take as like current syntactical structures, say in English, that might differ in like Russian or something, have like a common root in other languages. And so these syntactical structures, they change over time. And you have to like also, in your ability to study in the way that you're saying, also build into the, you know, that also build into that the fact that people are constantly improvising and modifying and changing the way that language works naturally at the same time as you're trying to like fix and study what those things are. This isn't so much in line with what you're saying about the criticism of what philosophers are doing, but just to point out, it's a blooming difficult task to engage in that empirical investigation too.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, when I've written on this, I've been very pessimistic about the prospects of experimental philosophy readily allowing us access to how non-philosophers think about these philosophical questions. But I don't necessarily think that it's a lost cause. What I've talked about is what I call bottom up. I don't know if there's technical terms out there for this, so I apologize to anybody that's familiar with meta research or something, but bottom up instead of top down approaches. So what I mean by that is, instead of the philosophers going in saying, look, there's three positions you could take about free will. There's libertarian, compatibilism, and like indeterminism or something like that. Or sorry, not indeterminism. Sorry, I'm going to get some of those freezes, I guess. So we'll try to live with it. Incompatibilism, libertarian, compatibilism. And then so you design a study where you're like, all right, pick one, A, B, or C. Not naturally 100% of your participants are going to pick A, B, or C. And so then you could say, look, 100% of people endorse one of the traditional three positions. Well, that's because you baked it into the study.
Yes.
And, you know, I've mocked this before by asking people, what's your favorite fruit, apples or bananas?
Yeah.
Pick one. And then when people answer, you ask them, was that in fact your favorite fruit? Some of them say no. So for some people, it might be yes. But, you know, this is not a reliable way to find out whether people, you know, what people's favorite fruit is. Because you would want to know what the full range of possible options are within the population you're testing. And when it comes to philosophical questions, what you want to know are the contours of their actual thought. What you don't want to do is say, I know in advance of gathering any data at all people think in accordance with the categories and distinctions that are prevalent in some technical academic field. And so therefore, these must manifest as real psychological constructs that are, like, keep in mind, they're presupposing that there are psychological constructs that are a feature of ordinary human cognition that are like cashed out in terms of the individual differences that are measurable. That's not something you just know. If we want to, like, that's not how we establish what the big five personality traits were. You have like the lexical hypothesis, and you say, okay, well, if we look at all these different languages, we see all this reliable recurring cluster of words. And then you do like factor analysis, and you have predictive validity. You have a bunch of statistical stuff you have to do to even begin to get a glimpse at what the possible underlying structure of human thought would be. And it's not obvious. It's something that requires extensive cross-cultural data and a whole bunch of data. Like, this is something that remains unresolved after decades. And this is just for basic personality features like extroversion, like whether that's a thing or not. And yet philosophers think that they can figure out the contours of thought with respect to much more subtle and complicated philosophical stuff. Yep, it's all got to be A, B, or C without any data. No data.
Even think in terms of, I know it was just a turn of phrase, right? Because I obviously like know a lot about your views of language, but think about like what you just said there, even in terms of like contours of thought, where it's like, you know, this idea that within thought there are these like grooves, and you're trying to like those are what you're trying to tease out as effects in your study. So you kind of like bias your study just by even maybe the metaphors that you bring in, where what you need to do somehow is engage in like a completely neutral but also exhaustive analysis of the ways people use words naturally somehow in like, you know, in a controlled setting, but then naturally bring out those differences without somehow biasing it by you know, giving people one of the taxonomy and that have like influencing the way it's a really difficult methodological task, I think.
Yeah, you're right. You know, already one might presume that the way that we work with respect to these philosophical issues is that one has a fixed stance, and that one basically deploys that stance linguistically, behaviorally, in like a, as for instance, a context insensitive way. So if you believe in like libertarian free will, you act accordingly and speak accordingly in all contexts. But what if a person acted and spoke that way in one context, but not in another context?
Yeah,
How
yeah.
would you pick up on that in a study? Because which context would be salient while participating in the study would depend on whether you're doing like a field experiment and they're currently in that context, or you could bring them into a lab setting where they're in neither of those two contexts.
No, yeah.
Now, which one of those, if either, are you prompting? Who knows? And, you know, we already have this presumption that there's like invariance with respect to the trait. There may not be invariance with respect to the trait, which isn't to say that we don't have traits. People have personalities. There was a big war about whether personality even existed some years ago. And I think that personality came out with, yeah, we have personalities, but they are sensitive to context. So maybe there are these core concepts that are contextually variable, but that's not typically the way that philosophers construe these sorts of things. I mean, people will say stuff like, if you find that a participant in your study has one realist belief, they're a moral realist by default, because moral realism is the view that there's at least one moral, like stance-independent moral fact. So if they think there's at least one stance-independent moral fact, they're a realist. Now, there's a sense in which you could say that that's trivially true. Sure, fine. The person is a realist. But look at what that person seems to be thinking if you take the data about their response pattern at face value. The person appears to be saying, when it comes to, say, the matter of abortion, they're a moral relativist about that. But then when it comes to the matter of, you know, torture, they're a moral realist about that. Are you supposing that that person thinks that there's like metaphysics varies from one moral claim to the next, or that what they mean varies from one context to the next? That's a weird thing to attribute to people. And I've never heard of a philosopher thinking that. I've never heard of a philosopher that says, I'm a relativist about these things and a realist about these things. You do have people like David Wong, who has like a circumscribed realism. There's like it's a hybrid theory, but it's not as like piecemeal as what these data would show is the way that people think. There's something funny about that data, and philosophers should be more mindful of that fact. I don't know. I'm saying too much about this data, but whatever.
No, I agree with what you're saying, and I think actually another additional complication, even in terms of what you're saying, is that, you know, there is an account. It's not like say someone using the phrasing there is a stance independent fact or objectively P or something like that, sort of somehow establishes the metaphysics of some objective theory or something, right? Because there is a, you know, an anti-realist can account for how someone is able to say that. So like, how can you even empirically tell the difference between the truth of some of the, you know, like, how do you tell the difference between people saying, like, can you even empirically establish that people like really mean these theories, if you know what I mean, by using the words that way, one way rather than another? That's something that I've thought about, like methodologically. Like is that a limitation of Expo? Will it always be kind of like a speculative argument that you have to make beyond what a study design can show, or something that, you know, like could a study design show that some particular semantic analysis is wrong or something like that? And I genuinely don't know on that.
Yeah, well, it's weirder than that, because some of the approaches that philosophers take to language are so strange that they don't even claim that their analysis of ordinary language makes any claim to how people are actually thinking. So I have a passage here that I'm going to share. I've shared it before on the channel, but I'm going to share it again just because I really, I got the wrong paper. Here it is. And it's just, I just find this so strange. Let me find it. All right, here's the passage. It's this. This is from Walter Sinnott Armstrong, and the article is called Mixed Up Metaethics. The passage is, there are two ways to describe moral language. An internal project seeks to capture the psychological processes or representations that actually occur when people use moral language. However, contemporary realists and expressivists are not trying to do that. When Jackson and Petit use networks of truisms, or when Gibbon Gibbard cites hyperstates, they surely know that these theoretical constructions do not reflect actual psychological entities or events. Instead, they want their theories to be externally adequate in capturing the outputs of our linguistic systems without necessarily reflecting the internal workings of that system. In this respect, their project is more like Chomskyan grammar, which uses constructs without claiming psychological reality. And he goes on to say that this latter characterization, the external project, is the one that he's operating on.
Well, kind of just so tell me if I'm making sense of this correctly. So he's saying there are outputs of language, and these explanations are adequate to explain what those outputs are, but the theories themselves are not true. Like what? I don't understand.
I think the theories are true. If they're true about the outputs of the language,
Well,
I'm not quite sure what that means.
That's what I mean. Like,
what is
what
output of the language?
Well, this is what I mean when they said there. So the explanations are sufficient to explain the outputs of the language, but they're not true like internally. Like, what does that mean for them not to be true internally? As in, they like what does that mean? Other than that they're false explanations because they aren't actually about what's going. I don't. Yeah.
Right. So let's say I believe in God, and that my believing in God is what causes me to say I believe in God. Then the description of like what I mean, and like if you say, well, what do you mean when you say you believe in God? And I say, oh, I believe in an all powerful, like an omnimax entity, something like that. So this, like, if you were trying to explain what I meant with the internal project, you would explain me saying I believe in God, and by that I mean an omnimax entity, like an all powerful, all knowing, all good being. By the fact that that's what I believe, like, right, like the fact that I believe it is that accounts for why I'm saying that.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. What I think.
Yes,
But these accounts are like no. You look at the language of what people are saying, and the proper semantic analysis is that they are making non-propositional claims when they make a moral claim. They're expressing non-propositional content. But it's not the person thinking that. That's not what the person is trying to do. It's not what the person's thinking. There's no system in the head for expressing emotions, and then that accounts for why they're saying murder is wrong.
The person wouldn't.
The psychology has nothing to do with it. Sorry?
Well, so is their claim then the person wouldn't give this report if you asked them? But this explanation,
maybe I'm not sure what other implications they would put behind this. To me, it just sounds barking mad. I don't know what the hell they think.
What I mean is maybe what they mean is something like, I don't know. You could give an explanation of a use of language, which is like, I don't know. There's this nerve that connects to the what was there was a phrase the behaviorists like that was like laryngeal modulations or something like that. But like you could give a causal explanation that was something like that, but you would say the person who was speaking wouldn't say I'm engaging in like laryngeal modifications because they don't necessarily have like a theory of the inner workings of their causal nervous system or something. Does that make sense? Maybe that's more charitably what they're saying. I don't really know though. Yeah, it's very weird.
I don't know. There's probably some charitable interpretation, and I'm not familiar with the meaning. So if somebody's watching this and you're familiar with linguistics and how this is supposed to work out, get in touch. It's entirely plausible. I'm just very, very ignorant about this. But something about this sounds very strange to me. There seems to be a bizarre insensitivity to and resistance to approaching language from a psychological perspective. From my point of view, I don't think it makes any sense to talk about trying to capture the linguistic outputs without concern for the underlying psychology, because I just see linguistic outputs as just like a behavioral output. And to me, this would be a bit like saying we're trying to just study people's behavioral outputs without any concern for their psychology.
Yeah,
I don't even know what that would mean. The behavior is the psychology.
Yes, yeah.
And
this is maybe
I see people saying stuff as them like trying to do something. So to say, okay, we're going to study with the meaning of what you said without concern for what you're trying to do is completely insane to me. To me, this sounds a bit like someone saying, hey, look, we saw this person like running, and we're going to study what the purpose of their running without any concern for their psychology. That would be bananas. That'd be totally bananas. That's what this sounds like to me.
And that's where I say, like, but then aren't you just giving like false explanations? Because it'd be like, I don't know, they run because like their legs are animated by an animating force or something. Like,
Yeah,
is it
but you could give some plausible account.
Yeah,
They're running. I don't know. You could probably give some plausible sounding account about what they're doing. But it would be weird to presuppose that, for instance, all running has the same purpose.
But
And just the same, it does strike me as a little strange to think all, moral locutions have the same purpose. But
Oh yeah,
what some people doing this might say is they might say, no. I'm not saying literally 100% of the time that someone says abortion is wrong or stealing is wrong, that they all mean the same thing, but rather they might say there's like a semantic core, and then there's going to be all these sort of secondary, auxiliary, or parasitic uses. Obviously, there's going to be at least one type of parasitic use, which would be sarcasm. So obviously, abortion is wrong. That could be like a standard, like a paradigmatic moral claim. And then this would be an instance of a parasitic, like quote unquote moral claim. Yeah, abortion is wrong. So if you're being sarcastic about it, you don't mean abortion is wrong. You actually mean abortion is not wrong, or something like that. Or you're mocking a person that's saying that. So they might allow for that sort of thing, and for performance errors and other sorts of things. So it doesn't have to capture perfectly all linguistic outputs. It just has to capture some a sensible, like, semantic core, some central usage.
But what is maybe concerning to me or questionable to me about what they're doing is, like, do they take themselves to be giving theories that have any content to them at all, or just like completely, sort of empty but ad hoc theories, or false theories? Because insofar as they're saying, say, I don't know, there are non-cognitive emotions determine language use or something like that. Well, then there must be some account of what that is, right? But then they're also saying at the same time, I don't mean there is a thing called a non-cognitive state. But then what do you mean? Like, have you said anything at all? Like, if you don't mean that there is a thing called a non-cognitive state that we can now operationalize in some way as like a psychological thing, then what have you said? You've not given, you've like said blah.
I don't know. Yeah, so I'd really like to talk to people that take these sorts of approaches and get a better understanding of how they think, what exactly are they doing, and how does it relate to human psychology, if it does, and how do you settle meta-ethical questions this way? Because this is something I asked some years ago. I went in a forum for like moral philosophers, and I asked them whether the question of whether people are cognitivists or non-cognitivists, realist or anti-realist, whether that's an empirical question or not. And I didn't keep track, and I didn't have a method for doing a poll, but I had the rough impression that it was about 50-50. You have people saying, yeah, this is clearly empirical. And then you have people saying, I guess it's empirical. And then you have people saying, no, this isn't empirical. That's weird. Why would a group of professionals not even agree whether the question was empirical or not?
Yeah.
How do they not even know that? And I'm not criticizing them. I don't think it's their fault. I don't think it's clear. I don't know what descriptive meta-ethicists, like meta-ethicists trying to figure out the meaning of ordinary moral claims, I don't know what they're doing, having read what they take themselves to be doing. It's weird, because they'll say stuff like, my goal is to capture the meaning of what the person that you would run into and discuss things with riding on the bus means. So if you're trying to capture what the person means, shouldn't their psychology matter? And yet then I'm told their psychology doesn't matter. It's very strange.
Yeah, well, there's a whole can of worms to open. Shall we move on to the Danny video? Finally,
yeah, let's look at the Danny video. I'm getting some great criticism of me here. I don't know if you saw this one.
I did see. Yeah, they've been they've been yapping a bit in the chat. Yeah, so.
A bit. Let's look at the Danny video. So I'll play the clip which Danny has in his channel, if I could figure out how to do that again. Geez, I don't do a stream for like 10 days, and I don't know how to do anything anymore. All right.
Yeah, when I first joined for the chat to know, I was trapped in the bottom, and Lance was like, "Talk to me," and I was like, "Let me."
Yeah, I just didn't add you to it, but it's their fault for making the whatever. Okay. All right, let's play this. Wait, should we pause this randomly during it so that it's like not 2.5 minutes of just a straight clip? Or are we allowed?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We need to add some unique. I get what you're saying. Yeah. So this is Jubilee. They sit in a circle. They run the thing. Yeah. I suppose it's worth saying at this point there has been about 45 minutes of Peterson engaging with atheists. So just so people who probably everyone's watched it, but people who haven't watched it, it's been about 45 minutes. Danny's been sat down, kind of like listening to Peterson give some, I would say, fairly poorly thought through philosophical critiques of atheism, and a lot of them have also been like quite combative and tribalistic. The one, I think, 2 people before this was with Parker Get a Job, and Peterson denied that he would lie in any circumstances to save someone, and he even said that people who lied during like the Holocaust to save Jews from whatever bad things might happen to them, it's actually their fault due to sin, or it was likely their fault due to sin that they were in that situation in the first place. So I think understandably those sorts of things are why Danny is a little bit like, God damn it, this guy needs to be like sort of, his feet held to the fire kind of thing.
Yeah, I think Danny was both frustrated by Peterson's performance during the event and had been frustrated by Peterson's performance over the past few years because of his tendency towards obfuscation and being evasive with responding to questions. As a little bit of additional context, and you'll see Danny comment on this, and we'll probably pause it a couple more times as it goes through. The video was initially titled Christian vs. 20 Atheists, but if you go and look up the original video now over on Jubilee, and I do encourage you to go do that and check out the original video, I think the video is worth watching the whole way through, even if you find it frustrating, even if you don't think the conversation is productive, because of this is a kind of, I want to say that this moment is a kind of watershed in the online debate and intellectual space because of how much of an impact it's had. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. This video has been reviewed by everybody, everybody's uncle and cousins and nephews and brothers and sisters. Everyone's reviewing this thing. There's like William Lane Craig has commented on it. Lots of people are reviewing it. So there's a lot of material to consume here. And I think it raises lots of questions about like debate strategy and how to approach a conversation and that sort of thing. Anyway,
you weren't finished. You haven't.
The title of the video was changed to Jordan Peterson versus 20 Atheists. I don't know exactly why, but it may have something to do with this conversation.
Well, let me tell you an additional funny detail as well, even about that. So at the very start of the video, Jordan Peterson calls it. Jordan Peterson says, "I'm surrounded by 25 atheists," but if you count as you say, the video says 20 atheists, and if you count the number of atheists on screen, you will count 21. So, I mean, I don't know what's going on there, just from as well. Like, obviously, this is independent. They have changed the title, of course, but also like the number of atheists keeps like changing depending on who you ask and when.
Do we know that all 20? There's 20. I didn't count.
I think there is 21 because I just counted, and someone else put this as a comment on one of my things. Let's go. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Yeah, 21. 21 plus Peterson as a who knows what. And yeah, he says 25 at the start. I think maybe the reason they've cut one out is because they didn't show any of their, but they didn't show any clips. I don't know. Yeah, I can't tell you why.
They didn't show everybody anyway, did they?
I don't think so. They didn't. That's what I was going to say. I
remember seeing 21 conversations. So it shouldn't it be Jordan Peterson, who may or may not be a Christian, since he said he doesn't have to tell. So it should be possible Christian versus 20, 21, or 25 atheists.
Yeah, that's right.
That would be the right title. But isn't it possible like one of the 21 is not one of the atheists that talked, and maybe it's like security?
Yeah, they could be cast or or camera people. Yeah, I don't know.
It would make sense to have at least one security person like sitting right there in case someone did something stupid, like rushed towards the person.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I saw someone. I once saw somebody try to rush the stage at a Sam Harris talk. So
right, yeah.
People.
Someone did that. There's a famous clip at a Jordan Peterson talk once, actually, almost like this was a really weird thing, but they were like had a kind of mental illness, I think. And they were like very depressed, and they were like, "Help me, Jordan!" And it was like really kind of weird. It was like almost like a moment in the Gospels or something, you know, when someone tries to like come up to Jesus to get healed. It was very like peculiar. Yeah.
All right, but let's play the actual clip.
Yeah. Let's get.
Hey, Dr. Peterson.
How you doing?
Danny, nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Danny.
Danny.
You say atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I could flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay. Do Catholics attend to Mary?
Maybe
Yes.
just
Okay.
a pause on this. I know we had. I think that Danny should have probably just to give him a little bit more rope here to hang himself. He could have said, like, and what like combination of those is sufficient for saying, you know, just to, because the problem is because he said that'll do for the time we've got, but my views are actually a little bit more nuanced. That people are then defending Peterson here on the basis of like, well, he did say that isn't, you know, he's trying to do this like debate bro gotcha, but Peterson didn't say what the sufficient conditions are. And I reckon Danny, if Danny had gone like, so if someone does like two of those, is that like sufficient? Is it like which of those? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And also Peterson did list 3 characteristics. So it wouldn't be enough to say in order, like if those are all, are those necessary conditions? Because then to say that the Catholics attend to Mary would not entail that they worship Mary, because they would have to attend to, there was like a second thing in the middle, and then sacrifice.
Prioritize,
attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for. And someone might say, look, I attend to Mary, but I prioritize Mary within a hierarchy that's beneath God, and I don't sacrifice for Mary. So they might say something like that. So I don't worship Mary.
But the thing is that would undermine Peterson's atheists worship, you know, something, right? Because then, yeah, so it's the argument's still going to kind of go through and make some progress, you hope.
Yeah, I mean, there would be another direction that you could then take it, because, you know, what if there's stuff that I'm not willing to sacrifice for, like at all? Yeah. Is everybody always willing to sacrifice for something? There could be, if Peterson's views weren't what I suspect they are, which is a confused jumble and mess, then there might be something interesting to extract out of there. But I don't think that there is.
I actually think I can tell you a little bit more about this. I don't know. Do you know about like 4E cognition stuff, right?
A little bit.
Yeah. So there's a cognitive psychologist called John Vervaeke, who I don't particularly like his work, but he has this view called relevance realization, which is supposed to be, I mean, this is what frustrates me, because I actually am kind of into like, you know, 4E embodied cognition type stuff. I think it fits quite nicely with like pragmatism and things, but I really dislike the approach that these people take. And so he claims to have an explanation to like problems of salience, you know, like problems of how do people form and prioritize goals, basically, is the question, which is a legitimate and genuine question of psychology, I believe. Like, you know, it's like, what is going on? Like, why do people direct their attention and goals at some things rather than all things at once or other things? But I think that his explanation isn't really a good explanation. It's like it's one of these very superficial explanations. He just repackages the phenomena and gives it a label. But what Peterson has done in taking this up with people like Vervaeke is they've just like kind of lumped in, yes, whenever someone engages in relevance realization, that practice is the same as worshipping, because worshipping is relevance realization. And then they've kind of like then gone, we've got this kind of like gotcha. So simplistic atheists, they think they've escaped God, but really they're just doing the exact same thing, because they engage in relevance realization, which is all it is to come into a relationship with God. So there is, I don't think you're wrong that it's just like this incredibly weird, confused like cluster of statements and claims, but there is also some attempt to say a little bit more. but it is just still very confused and weird as you get into it.
Yeah, a lot of it seems to involve, like, at least Peterson's strategy here seems to be this really lame and uninteresting strategy. Sorry, I'm being so critical, but I mean, whatever. To say, because an atheist, a lot of atheists are like, I don't believe in God. I don't worship anything. I don't do the religion stuff. Not every atheist is like that, but some of them are like that. And it's like, no, you do worship. You do have religion.
Yeah.
You do have your own God in a way. And then what you do is you define those terms so loosely or so obscurely that, like, technically exactly the same thing that the atheist currently believes falls within the scope of your gerrymandering of the terminology. And then you could say, aha. So it's just a very fancy way of, if I said, hey, I've got a chair here, I define this chair as God, so God exists. It's just a very fancy way of doing that.
The normative entanglement argument. It is that, it's like my theory says this of this word worship, right? Like when I'm talking in a theological context, I say, yes, here is everyone is worshiping in this way. But then when I talk in a different context and I bring my semantic analysis in, I take you to be giving my semantic analysis when you use the word, or
it's playing on it's playing on your audience's propensity to equivocate between your technical usage and whatever colloquial associations they have with the use of the term, to cause the person to think that you're really bad. So let's say, whenever a person is late for work, I'm the manager of a place, I say that they're murdering the business. They're murdering the business. And then I say, look, Martha came in late. She's a murderer. She's a murderer. And you're like, okay, but what do you mean like that? Oh, she clocked in 2 minutes late.
Yeah, I mean, she's like...
But I'm like, no, but look, when I say Martha's a murderer, all I mean is that Martha sometimes clocks in to work a few minutes late. She does her job fine, but she's a murderer. Now, if I went around saying Martha's a murderer, people are going to be like, ugh, I don't want to hang out with Martha. She's dangerous because she's like a person that plans out and kills other people. That's not what that means. So people take a word in ordinary language that has like connotations, these pragmatic implications. It has some stink on it, right? And then they're like, look, hey, I'm going to give you this technical usage that doesn't have any stink. It doesn't, I promise, no stink. So just murder, it's pure, it's distilled away from all the stinky stuff. So I'm just saying technically Martha's a murderer. And then if you're like, okay, fine. If by that usage, then Martha's a murderer. And they're like, see, I knew it. So Martha's a murderer. Yeah. So like, do they not realize they're just playing around? Like, and what's weird about it is these philosophers will insist they're using the word in its ordinary sense. But then the only way that their technique works is if the way that they're using the word is not the same as its usage in an ordinary sense. So what the hell are they doing? It's so weird. And this is absolutely ubiquitous in analytic philosophy, is to take this like allegedly pure distilled semantic meaning of a sentence and then use it, like present people with the sentence and say, hey, what do you think about this sentence? Doesn't it seem reasonable? And the reason it seems reasonable is because of the pragmatics, not because of the semantics.
Yes. Yeah. I've seen people do this with like a modal ontological argument where they say, well, don't you accept it's possible God exists? And they mean like, metaphysically possible rather than epistemically. And then they're like, so now I've got you committed to the premise. Similarly with like Peterson here, it's like, oh, so I mean like you act on behalf of something you value. And it's like, well, yeah. But like when I'm saying worship, like for me, like worship, that's not worship. And he's like, well, then it is for me. So you worship now, atheist. Well, that's not worship.
It's weird because this type of linguistic gerrymandering, it's a common feature of like bad amateurish arguments that you see in online debate spaces, but it simply exists in a highly sophisticated form among contemporary analytic philosophers.
Yeah.
And they publish papers like this. And it's profoundly embarrassing and ridiculous. It's all over the place. And you could critique it, and it never stops.
Yeah.
It never stops. Error theory is obviously wrong because it commits you to saying it's false that torturing babies is wrong.
Yeah.
Well, that's obviously absurd. Okay, what is the error theorist saying? They're not necessarily. They're not saying, I don't care if you torture babies, go ahead. And I'm not the first to make this point. So Richard Joyce actually includes a section on this in the Stanford Encyclopedia entry. Anyway, we're veering off.
Which SCP entry is it? Just out of...
let me find it. I think it's the moral anti-realism one.
Okay.
Oh my God, I typed awfully. No. I've read it on my channel like 30 times. So people are probably tired of it.
Oh no! Emerson Green's uploaded a new video about like some morphic resonance type thing. Oh no!
It's got to be the anti. Yeah. Okay. Is this it? Did I finally find it? Okay. Whatever. I know it's the Stanford Encyclopedia entry on moral anti-realism, and I know the example has something to do with stealing. Okay. Yeah, I found it. Should I share it again?
I just meant like just to reference it because I didn't know which one you were talking about. We don't have to.
Okay,
video. Yeah.
I'll send it to you. The chat can deal with it. Actually, I'll post it in the chat.
Yeah.
Here it is, and it says the last example, and then it has in parentheses, stealing is not morally wrong. You'll be able to find it, but I'll send it to you. Don't worry about it. There, I sent you the passage. Okay, play more of the Danny thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
So do they fit that description of worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
Well, they might not put her in the highest
But
place.
you would put it that way.
No.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back.
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within the
There's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary
below.
is quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at
So
the
let's
top.
maybe just
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your
So
Sorry?
yeah, so Peterson has now just introduced an additional part of this, and I do think that this is where maybe Danny just went a little bit too fast. I think Danny did a great job, right? I'm not. But I think he went a little bit too fast before clarifying this with Peterson, because Peterson has introduced this additional thing about hierarchy as part of his analysis of what's going on. And that wasn't there in his definition of worship, right? So we're like, for example, where in the hierarchy does something have to be for it to be considered worship, according to Peterson? And, is there some kind of structure to this hierarchy that it has to take on? Does it have to be does it have to have one thing at the top? Like what are the constraints in terms of like graph theory that you can have in terms of the shape and relationships of these things? Because there's a lot of different graphs that you can draw, where each node is like a value with a relation to some other node. And Peterson hasn't established any of those things, and those would be required to really make sense of what he's saying here, I think.
Yeah, but two things to be fair to Peterson. One is he's under severe time constraints, and two, he did explicitly say that given those time constraints, he's going to give this truncated account of what he's talking about. So in Peterson's defense, he does have those things going for him.
He does, yeah.
definition of worship?
Attend to.
Attend to. Do
Prioritize.
Okay, so he's adding, it's attend to, prioritize. It's not just attend to. So I still think, it was a little off for Denny to say, do people attend to Mary? Yes. Oh, so they worship Mary. Because Peterson didn't say all it takes is attending to.
And he's not said and or he's not said attend to and, or he's not said attend to or, like he's not told you what the relationship between these properties is.
Right. Is this like a disjunction or a conjunction?
Yeah.
Like what? Yeah, sure. This is one thing to point out. He should be much clearer than he is here. He should, because like the proper way to say that would be, in order to qualify as worshiping somebody, you would need to attend to them, prioritize them, and and sacrifice for them, or sacrifice for them. There's lots of ways he could clarify what he means here. You might call that a bit nitpicky, but when people are dealing with definitions, things are going to get pedantic. And, Peterson himself is infamous for saying, well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? It's entirely appropriate to be concerned about the question of what he means by that. Otherwise, he's applying profound and hypocritical double standards to other people, which I'm not saying he did do that. I'm saying if he were to have a problem with someone being pedantic, that wouldn't really be fair given how he talks to other people.
And just given that claim at the top that Peterson's chosen is atheists worship, atheists reject. It's like atheists worship even though they don't know it. Atheists worships something, or they worship God even though they don't know it. It's something like of that. I can't quite see it because it's hidden by the thing. Like, well, if we're to evaluate that claim, then we need to know exactly in what sense, like which of these criteria is it they're satisfying to be considered. What is it merely that they is it just merely that they focus on, they attend to something and that is sufficient in and of itself? When you say sacrifice, like, is that a necessary condition? Well, then do they sacrifice? What do you mean, like, they sacrifice? Like, I don't know that there are atheists who like sacrifice to not the proposition not God, or naturalism or something. So yeah, to actually make progress in terms of even evaluating what he's saying, those distinctions would be very helpful.
Yeah, and what for Peterson is going to qualify as sacrifice? I mean, is this a goat on an altar, or is this giving up your time for something, or is this, what exactly qualifies as sacrifice? It remains unclear to me. Maybe he gets clear on this somewhere, but it's not clear in this conversation, and that's unfortunate. But maybe could someone criticize Danny for asking an unfair question because it would require too much nuance?
Oh yeah, look, I think Danny's like loading him up here in the sense of I think Danny has been sat there for 45 minutes watching him beat up on people, and Danny's like, I'm gonna give him a taste of that, right? Which is, yeah, Danny can be criticized on that basis, but I actually think there's also a sense in which what he's doing is a good thing, because Peterson's just been completely evasive and accusatory with a bunch of people. And so almost like, he kind of deserves a bit of a taste of his own medicine, if you like. And I think then he should be like, yeah, I shouldn't be behaving like that, because, there's someone's going to come along who's sharper and can be nastier, and I should be a little bit nicer and clearer and more charitable with people than I have been, is my view. So.
Yeah. All right, let's try to get through this clip now.
What's sacrifice for?
What do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't add that to my definition.
You understand?
I said there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend to
so you can attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
Okay, now you're adding stuff to the definition, but your original definition.
I added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you familiar?
Just didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure.
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
Somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
Doctrines are very
how do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either you're a Christian or you're not.
I won't talk to you if you're a smartass.
Should we pause on
Either
this
you're
point?
a Christian or you're not. Which one?
I think at this point as well, he's really shot himself in the foot. So firstly, first reason he shot himself in the foot is that he has agreed to this, and it is, he knows it is called Christians versus atheists, and so he should, I think, at least be willing to concede, yeah, do you know what? I am defending the Christian view. The second thing is that Peterson has in a number of places publicly said that he's a Christian, right? Obviously, he has difficulties with ontotheology, with I think like the sort of like metaphysical commitments that sit behind certain versions of Christianity, which I think is actually fine, right? I mean, I would put myself in that position. I just think that you just don't have to be like he is about it. You don't have to be evasive and aggressive about that sort of stuff. And I mean, just even on a theological basis, to say within Christianity, it's Peter denies Jesus 3 times, right? So he should forgive himself a little bit, but there's got to be, if he wants that charitability, he doesn't want to be charitable like in that way with his opponents, but he's gonna now feel a little bit of what it's like to get the vitriol and the the lack of charity from the audience that he's often very willing to dish out in these sorts of disputes around these things. So that's what I say about that point.
Yeah, I don't see a huge problem with what Danny is doing at this point. And among other things, again, you got to put this in the context of, if you're trying to, so people will look at what Danny's doing here and they're going to say, oh, this is just stupid debate bro stuff, trying to be pedantic, trying to pin him down on definitions. Okay. Now, if a person is just speaking very clearly, right? I don't know. I always use food examples. So go to food examples. The wait staff at a restaurant is just, clearly explaining the food on the menu. And they're like, all right, well, it's a Caesar salad. It's got croutons. It's got romaine lettuce. And then you're like, but what do you mean by romaine lettuce? That would be ridiculous. Or to start questioning them on what they mean by like tap water instead of sparkling water. That'd be stupid. There'd be no reason to start questioning the person in that context. But in this context, and the same would apply to a philosophy context where a person is speaking in fairly clear and conventional ways. But in an intellectual dispute where a person has been consistently evasive and obscure and unclear and non-committal, where you're there to figure out where your differences are, how are you supposed to have a dispute between yourself as an atheist, if that's who you're the guest on this show, with a Christian, if you can't figure out what the person thinks?
Yeah.
You have to figure out what they think. I can't dispute what you think if I don't know what you think. So what Danny is doing here is intentionally exposing the weak, slippery definitions that Peterson uses. They they don't really hold up very well to scrutiny. And I think Parker did a pretty good job of this too when it came to the belief stuff, where Peterson's definition of belief was weird. And I do think Peterson had a good move there because Parker said something like, you're using the term belief in like a weird, non-standard way. Peterson wasn't. I talked about this in a stream a couple of days ago, but notice that term belief. There is belief in like in philosophy, a belief means like you affirm the truth of a proposition, and it could be any mundane proposition, right? So like I could hold up my phone right now. So Nathan, do you affirm that I have a phone here? Like it's true that
I deny it because as a pragmatist, I do not believe it's true. I haven't. No, yeah, I'm kidding. Yeah, I'm joking.
But
yeah,
like you believe I have a phone here now.
Yes.
I doubt you would be willing to die for that belief. Like if someone said lie and say there was no phone, you'd be like, all right, geez. Right.
Yeah.
So that's one sense of belief. And it's a very conventional sense of belief. Your beliefs are like what you think are true. But there is a sense of belief. Like if someone says, well, what, like if you're in a church and let's say I'm in a Catholic church and someone goes, are you Catholic? And I say, no, I'm not Catholic. And they say, well, what do you believe? They're not asking like, hey, list the full set of all beliefs. I'm like, well, I think 2 is larger than 1 and 3 is larger than 2. And at least one apple exists. And, like I'm not just going to list off all my beliefs.
I tell you what, though, I agree that sounds sort of crazy, but I actually think that something like that could potentially be required if something like correspondence theory is true. If you're sort of like providing someone with, if like, to correspond to reality is to like in some way resemble reality or to like you then must be representing sort of like all the associated facts around the claim to be making sense of it. So actually you should be sort of like like making all claims at the same time by making it. But anyway, that's a different, crazy point. Sorry.
Sure, I see where you're going with that. But obviously in the context, so you're in the church, you're like sitting in the pew or whatever, and someone says, hey, are you, I don't know what's in a Catholic churches, I don't go into them. And someone says, hey, are you Catholic? However this comes up, and you say, oh, no, I'm not Catholic. Like maybe they see that you like didn't go up and do the mass or something. And then they're like, oh, why didn't you, are you not Catholic? And you're like, yeah, no, I'm not Catholic. And then they say, well, what do you believe? They're asking about like your religious beliefs. They're asking about like, what are the central guiding beliefs in your life? And I think that's plausibly what Peterson was talking about when he said your belief, like what a belief is. Beliefs are like the central tenets that guide your life. And you frequently, like, it would be a little weird to say, these are my central beliefs. And yeah, I wouldn't die for these. Fuck these. I don't care. That's a little funny. There probably are people like that. sword point. Yeah, at sword point, they're like, no, I'm whatever religion you wanted me to be. Yeah, whatever. I'm that religion. I'm sure there's people like that. Maybe they're not really, maybe they're being insincere though. So I don't even know if that counts. But just the point is, there is a conventional sense of belief that Peterson was using, which is like your core guiding commitments. It's not like the full set of propositions that you affirm as true. So what's weird is that move was available to Peterson when he was talking to Parker. He could have just said, whoa, I'm not using the word belief in an unconventional sense. It's a polysemous term. It has multiple meanings, and I'm using one of the conventional meanings of it, and that's what I meant. We're talking past each other. That's an easy move to make, and he didn't. So one of the things that's frustrating about this isn't that in every case Peterson was talking insane nonsense. I think people look at the Parker discussion and they're like, wow, his definition of belief is so stupid. Not really. His definition wasn't stupid. It's more that he wasn't thinking on his feet and responsive to the dynamic of the conversation. And that's frustrating to see.
And additionally, I would say it's that he's so dismissive of these sort of like rival views. For example, being dismissive of, he says like to Parker something like, it's not propositional and stuff like that. But I mean, I myself am obviously incredibly critical of, propositional semantics and things like that. I'm happy to call myself a propositional eliminativist if that will be helpful for people to understand my views. But the difference is, I think, whether or not you have the ability to understand those views on their own terms and communicate what's wrong with them. So, if you're sort of like rejecting things from a place of ignorance, that's not because that's not because you're in a good place to say that they're wrong. It's just that you've like randomly got some stuff to say, and you probably shouldn't be trusted in terms of the reasons that you're giving to dismiss these claims. And I think that Peterson is often on these things sort of not talking from a place of expertise, but talking from a place of ignorance about the relevant differences between like theories and views that he's sort of like built into his sort of smorgasbord of random theological claims and philosophical claims and psychological claims,
Yeah, maybe so. Let's finish the clip.
Yeah.
Is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
So that last point as well, Danny obviously what he says is rude there. Do you know what I mean? Like, it is rude that to say you're really quite nothing. And I think that a lot of what I've seen is a lot of people reacting to that and being like, so Danny sucks, like for saying that. That shows everything about his character. I think that that's super unfair because Peterson was the one to stop talking about the topic and make it about Danny's character there, to say, you're really quite something. And I think all Danny did was mirror back to him that behavior and show this isn't good, right? I think that that's what that was. Peterson goes, you're really quite something. Danny goes, well, if that's the game, you're really quite nothing, aren't you? And I think that's fair enough, actually. Well, it's not nice. It's not good. You could say he could have modeled better behavior, but I think that it's Peterson who took it there, right?
Yes, I totally agree that even if you think what Danny did was wrong, Peterson, like, first of all, people are going to say, oh, Danny's a kid. Danny is so young and immature. Okay, well, shouldn't we hold Peterson then to higher expectations for appropriate social conduct, if that's the case? So Peterson should be held to a higher standard if you're going to have that kind of attitude. And yet, who instigated? Who started it with the personal attacks? Peterson. Yeah. So Peterson, and look, people will mock the idea, like when, two kids get in a fight and they're like, their parents get involved and they're like, he hit me first. Well, the one that hit them first is doing something worse. It is worse to start the fight. Yeah. Throwing the second punch is not as bad as throwing the first punch. There's a reason we have self-defense laws. If someone starts punching me in public and I punch them back, I don't typically go to prison for that. I'm allowed to say, hey, I don't want to be punched in the face. But you're not allowed to go, hey, I want to punch you in the face because I don't like your face. So Peterson started with the verbal punch in the face of, I don't like your face, I'm going to punch it. And then Danny punched back. Now, Danny punched back a lot more harshly. So it's kind of like, Peterson slapped Danny, and Danny goes whop and like uppercuts him.
Yeah.
So, but like, if you're going to escalate, be prepared for
Yeah.
escalation. I mean, come on.
Yeah,
That could even be some kind of Peterson principle. I could see that, like him saying, if you provoke someone, if you slap a tiger, don't be surprised if it claws you back. You don't, or you might see him saying something like, "Don't go pulling a dragon's tail." Well, that's what he did. He pulled the dragon's tail.
Yeah.
So why he shouldn't be surprised by that reaction?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, you got to throw dragons in there. I actually did a poll on my. I don't know if I could share it. I think I can.
But the thing about dragons is dragons sit on top of gold.
This just reminded me of, I think it's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, when he says like dragons eat gold, or I don't know. Let me see if I could find the survey.
Is this like a Twitter poll or something else?
Oh wait, I'm so dumb. I could just do this and then add it back. There we go. Yeah, so no, I did the survey right here on YouTube. So the question I asked was, Danny, a friend and guest on the channel, has gone viral for a recent exchange. Anyway, whatever. I asked what Danny's response here, whether it was not justified and not effective, not justified but effective, justified and effective, or justified but not effective. And you can see the results here. I got 217 votes. People on your channel, you could go over to mine, go to the post section and vote on here if you want. It's still open for voting. But what you could see is like 80% of people or so thought that Danny's response was justified. Only about 1 in 5 think it was unjustified. And a slim majority, but a majority think it was both justified and effective. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that probably aligns actually with like my personal, that is a distribution of my personal credences, I was I think that's about right. Is it? Yeah, I think.
Yeah, and you did a survey yourself, so yours actually inspired me to do that one. What did you ask?
And mine was like about the optics, really. So it was like, basically what I wanted to understand is like, are you a Peterson fan or a Peterson hater? And do you think Danny won or Peterson won? So trying to like figure out if that bias is the answer, or if there's kind of like a unanimous tilt towards one of those views. And did you did this influence your view of Peterson positively or negatively? So again, is being a Peterson fan, like, are Peterson fans viewing this and going, yeah, Peterson won, positive, or and that Peterson haters are going, yeah, Danny won, and there's kind of like that is clearly what sort of predicts it, or is it like a more unanimous effect of no, like that Peterson looks bad? Yeah,
and it was unanimous, right? Like even the Peterson fans were like, oh yeah, he did bad there.
There was a small effect, I would say, of like Peterson fans a little bit more thought thought Peterson came across positively, but yeah, it was like overall pretty much everyone agreed.
But it was still a preponderance of them thought that he did badly, was it not?
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like there was a slight difference between Peterson.
It wasn't quite as overwhelming of a majority.
Yeah, but it was still a majority. Yeah.
All right, so that's the Peterson stuff. Are there any? Because I'm like, this is a watershed. This is so important.
You can ask the chat as well if they want to ask anything.
What is it, chat? Do you have questions or comments? Maybe if there's something. So I feel like this is important. Maybe it's just because it's close to me, what's happening, that I feel that way. But like Peterson has been an important cultural force in like the online intellectual world for a while, and I feel like this is a moment where maybe this is a stretch to say, but kind of an emperor's no clothes type moment where people are like, whoa, something's off here with this. But maybe it's not so much that it's always been that way, although I think so, or there's been like a decline in Peterson's rhetorical abilities and his quality of discourse. I think those can both be possible. Like he always had, I think, obscure and weird ideas, but he's doing particularly poorly more recently.
I'll tell you the reason I feel bad about it is that I think there is a direction that Peterson is pushing in that is actually very Wittgensteinian and pragmatist and quite. I think there's some good thoughts in the direction he's pushing in, And so I've actually even myself found myself getting a little bit of blowback from the general reception of this sort of thing, because there are, you know, like there are criticisms of like propositional accounts of language, of non-pragmatist accounts of belief, of contemporary analytic metaphysics, and the types of ways that people will engage in debates. Where I'm catching strays from this Peterson debate, because I'll be saying, you know, I'll be giving like analyses of belief and knowledge and God that are not the sorts of ones that people in analytic philosophy of religion would want to give. And so they're like, this guy's just like Peterson. He's, you know, yeah, what do words even mean and stuff? And I'm like, so I'm catching strays from this. And I found it a little bit frustrating, because I'm like, no, like, look, I've been for years now, like incredibly critical of a lot of Peterson's stuff, because I think the problem is that he doesn't understand these rival ways of understanding and viewing things. And he's not being clear about what the alternative is he's offering and why that is a better view. So that's just to say, yeah, like that's, look, I think it's positive overall, because Peterson has allied his views with such harmful politics as well. Not that we have to like get into all that stuff, but, you know, just in terms of the way that his whole view set is like manifesting itself, I think that it's good that that stuff is receiving pushback and people are seeing, yeah, like you say, an emperor has no clothes moments. My hope, though, for like a best outcome is not that just like Peterson would be destroyed and disgraced or something, but actually that it would prompt him to sort of like reflect over these past few years, what sorts of people have I surrounded myself with, right? Like these people from the Daily Wire, a lot of like kind of right-wing grifters, people who aren't very careful in their expositions of philosophy, their treatments of theology. And maybe I should be thinking a little bit more about surrounding myself with people who are prepared to say no to me, people who are have a little bit more expertise in the topics they talk about. That, you know, those sorts of things, right? That would be a better outcome for me, is to see Peterson have a redemptive arc out of this. Not that he would just be destroyed and, you know.
Yeah. You know, this, I very much agree with that. I don't want to, like, I feel a little bad for him in this scenario. It looks like that went quite rough for him. And I don't have to be a fan of somebody, and I can be very critical of that person.
Oh, yeah,
that was wild.
Yes,
but, you know, a lot of people, they just want to see, you know, they kind of have this like Arnold Schwarzenegger Conan attitude, or they want to see their enemies driven before them and hear the lamentations of, you know, like they just want to see people that they don't like get crushed. Why wouldn't you want the people that you think have bad views or having a bad influence change and be better people and have a good influence? Wouldn't that be better? You know, and it's often people that have this attitude that if you ask those same people about the prison system, they'll say one of the horrible things about the prison system is that we're not even making any serious attempt to reform prisoners. And these are often people that have done very, very bad things, murderers and stuff. Murderers can become good people. So it's weird how they're like, hey, prisoners deserve a redemptive arc, but not this person with contrary ideology. They could burn in hell forever. That's a weird attitude. We should want people to reflect on these things and become better. And, you know, the pragmatism stuff has been there for a long time. Way back when Sam Harris and Peterson first encountered one another, those awful discussions on the Sam Harris, like his podcast, I don't know what it was, Waking Up, whatever the hell he calls it, Making Sense.
Making Sense and Waking Up. Yeah.
Sorry?
I'm just joking, like Making Sense, Waking Up, like it's all woke.
Well, yeah, Waking Up, but that's a whole, but he said he was some kind of like evolutionary pragmatist back then. And I'm a pragmatist, you're a pragmatist. I want pragmatists to get a good showing. I don't want him out there saying he's a pragmatist and then doing a botched job of it and making pragmatism look silly. But yeah, you know, so surrounding himself by people that see him as a tool for pushing an agenda, those are not the kind of people that you should want to surround yourself with. It would be, I think, very healthy for him not to have this Jubilee type situation. It's too antagonistic. People were there to like score points. They were. I mean, let's be real here. They were. But, you know, it would be good for him to sit down with somebody that really disagrees with his views and have an open-ended conversation where the person's not antagonistic. I think that would be really healthy for him, to just not be surrounded by people that just say yes to everything and roll out the red carpet for him. So there is a balancing act between sycophants and assholes, and we need that.
Yeah, and I think like I genuinely, I really hope Danny does well out of this. From what my understanding is, he has quite a lot of people have like reached out to him, like Piers Morgan's show, things like that. I think like quite big people want to.
I don't know how much of that is supposed to be public. So
okay. Well, allegedly people have maybe not. I don't. I can't take. People have reached out to Danny, is to say, has been the rumor, and if if he does do very well out of this, that would be really great for him. I hope he does. I hope he does do well. And my only worry is what this could do, because Danny outclasses Peterson so much, is maybe put on a pedestal some like highly questionable metaphilosophical assumptions around analytic philosophy and philosophy of religion, or at least from my point of view, right? Because what I don't want to see people see as the ideal contemporary analytic philosophy of religion as it's practiced, and like sort of then the discourse go away from instead just like taking religion on its own terms, right, and thinking about it in a slightly different way, like go towards this sort of analytic, like everyone's just giving each other like Bayesian arguments for everything, and analytic accounts of concepts and stuff. I mean, I think all that stuff can be clarifying in a particular place, but I don't want to see that be the direction that everyone goes in. It would wind me up so much.
Yeah. Okay, so give me a moment.
Yeah, no worries. Oh, good. Oh no, it was. I think that is a joke. That thing. Yeah, don't.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that's sarcasm.
All right. Sorry, I was just dealing with something.
Yeah.
Give me one more second.
I think it's all good. It's all good.
Okay.
And look, there's post processing. You can edit a tiny sliver. I think we'll be okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So
I don't know how to tweet this person, so they're joking.
Okay. So we also had this was actually initially what we were going to talk about. We're like an hour and a half in. You had some criticisms of Matthew over at Bentham's newsletter. Do you want to talk about some of that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, many criticisms. So one of my where to begin, and I don't mean this rhetorically. Like, he gets so much wrong, just because I've got. There are quite a number of issues that I have with his views, and they're a little bit different from one another. I think, okay, one of them is that what I've observed is a tendency in his philosophical output to engage in highly controversial and contentious issues because they're very engaging to write articles about. And I frequently see him as kind of taking heterodox positions on these, and sort of I don't know, like the sort of like form is, here's a view that you would initially think is incredibly heterodox and weird. I'm going to argue for it, and of course that's not what he's saying. That's my interpretation of what's going on in a lot of these cases. But what I'll tell you what is kind of frustrating about it from my point of view is that the arguments then that are given often depend on incredibly controversial methodological assumptions and methodological assumptions and premises in terms of the premises that are being plugged into these methodologies. And and people are challenging him on these things. So, for example, like you've had an exchange with him where you actually got him to explain that he understood your criticisms of moral realism. So it's not a skill issue. Like he knows these objections exist and he's capable of understanding them. But then afterwards, for example, he will go back to just making the same arguments without even including rebuttals to the objections that people might make, and he presents these arguments then to a brand new audience as though these objections don't exist, they're not problems. He's got it all figured out, and I don't think you're the only person to experience this. Actually, I think a number of people have experienced this, either challenging his use of Bayesian methodology, his conceptions of simplicity, his empirical claims. Those are the sorts of things that you've challenged, for example. And then he's got these sort of stock responses that I've seen him bringing out to these things that, again, people still have challenges to those stock responses because they're often either question-begging arguments, that is to say, arguments you would only believe if you already agreed with the conclusion of the case that they're supposed to be sort of like a parity case of, or they depend on these claims about highly ramified intuitions, right? So what do I mean highly ramified intuitions? I mean, saying the sentence, I have an intuition that, alongside some claim that has a lot of very specific philosophical content to it, such that I find it incredibly suspicious that someone just happens to have all of the right intuitions. I mean, I don't think there is I think the faculty of intuition itself is highly suspect and suspicious. And Matthew seems to be unwilling to deconstruct that or engage in critical analysis of the concept or the as what you've called like pseudo psychological sort of faculty or something. And yeah, that like it just seems really, really convenient that what the specific propositional content of these intuitions is exactly what's required to establish the premises of all of these controversial arguments, and that he also happens to have intuitions that then overcome all the responses and defeaters to those intuitions that people raise. So this overall approach to me seems like poor methodology that bottoms out in a place that's incredibly hand wavy and can justify anything. There's no actual principled way there. And this is not exactly an accusation, but someone who is, say, being incredibly dishonest and engaging on topics for reasons of, say, content farming with these methods would look indistinguishable from what Matthew is doing. And I think he is genuinely convinced of a lot of the arguments that he makes for various reasons. But I'm saying that this methodology is just so prone to abuse. There's no constraints on it, and it exhibits a lot of these intellectual vices that I don't think people should copy. And so, yeah, we can talk more about any of those particulars, but yeah.
I mean, you said exactly at least a chunk of what I take to be the issue with Matthew's approaches. I think Matthew is enchanted with analytic philosophy, with the problems that it tries to solve, with its methodology. It offers this seemingly rigorous and incredibly deep approach to the fundamental questions of the world. It markets itself quite well to the appropriate audience, and I think he is the appropriate audience for what's being sold. And I think he's bought into a set of practices and methodologies that kind of within the methods themselves include content about how wonderful, reassuring, and awesome the methods are. Like, these methods are great. These are the only methods you could use to address these problems. But those are the output of the method. And so you have this analytic philosophy. A friend of mine once talked about it as a kind of like a ratchet that only goes in one direction. And you could kind of think of it, and I've used the idea of like a black hole, where you can kind of cross for certain sorts of, we'll call it an epistemological event horizon. That if you pass the epistemological event horizon, if you adopt a set of reasoning practices of a certain kind, those reasoning practices can pull you in a way where there's no way to reason out of it. And I feel like this is what's happened with Matthew, and that this is what's happened with a host of analytic philosophers, is that they have this whole internal system that everything is it's like this Mobius strip of everything is mutually propping up and supporting all the other things. And once you get somehow shunted into the system, you never get out of it. You just go around the Mobius strip, and it just, but this justifies that, which justifies this, which justifies that, which justifies this, which justifies that. And you got to have this because of that, because of this, and because of that. And you end up in this cognitive whack-a-mole problem where every time anybody whacks one of the problems, another one pops up.
What about my...
Sorry. Yeah. It's just the whole system is self-reinforcing in a way that is virtually inescapable unless you could somehow snap out of the whole thing. I think it's scary that there has been this, what I take to be methodological capture of the discipline that is supposed to be spawning new sciences and devising new ways of integrating and bringing consilience to the disparate, the humanities and the sciences with one another. Philosophy could be this really incredible binding and unifying agent, this incredible force in the sciences and the humanities that helps us bridge fields, that helps facilitate multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary work. It could do so much, and it often does do a lot of that. But you still have this core of analytic philosophers that they want their little autonomous, methodologically independent island, and they don't want anybody to come on that island. They're like dedicated to insularity. And I see that in the way that Matthew approaches these issues. He's constantly talking about how smart philosophers are and how philosophy helps you, it makes you better at thinking and better at reasoning and all this stuff. And there's this comparative implication that the sciences don't do this, that, philosophers are good at handling a whole bunch of things, but not scientists. And I think Matthew just does not at all adequately respect what people with applied knowledge can do. And sure, they're not going, like a person that is an amazing engineer, but has no training or understanding of philosophy is not going to do good with Matthew in some philosophical dispute. But the kinds of techniques, problem solving skills and abilities that an engineer has is not something you're going to get out of a philosophy. You're not going to get that from reading Hume and Kant or God forbid, Hegel.
Just to comment on that point, right? So something that I've seen recently is I've seen a couple of PhDs, I believe one a PhD in mathematics and one a PhD in physics, criticize Matthew on some of his arguments. So the mathematics guy wrote a post criticizing Matthew's understanding of simplicity, and the physics guy criticizing Matthew's use of Bayesianism in the fine-tuning argument. And I think that the objections are correct and strong. The problem is because Matthew is engaging in the philosophical discourse, he has come across forms of these objections before. So he basically what he can refer to is he can refer to some resolution in the literature. And that resolution itself, as I say, may well actually be what you think about that resolution will be determined by what you think about the first argument in the first place. Like the problem is going to be the same between the two cases. And so it's just question begging, really, like whether or not it's question begging to appeal to these cases where you use to say the same methodology with the same problematic flaws. Like I think about, that piece I just wrote today about, often they'll say, so you're critical of this use of Bayesianism. Well, that would mean, if the stars spell out made by God in the sky, then you couldn't use a Bayesian analysis to believe in God. But of course you would believe in God if the star spelled out made by God in the sky. And it's like, no, because you might well believe in God if you saw made by God written in the sky. But would that be the upshot of applying this type of Bayesian reasoning? Or would it be something else, right? Like it's perfectly consistent to say, I would believe in God if I saw made by God written in the sky, but not because I use this Bayesian analysis in this particular way. And so in terms of what you're saying there, this is what's frustrating is, so he'll say to these people with quite deep criticisms of his views that they've independently come to, for example, physicists respond in this way. Have you engaged with this? This paper says this about that. And the problem is that it's only shifting the problem a step back, and the same problem is still present. But then these people who are, say, physicists or mathematicians, they're not enmeshed in the philosophical discourse, or they're not aware of what's happening in that philosophical dispute. So then the optics become, they've been rebutted or something, when they haven't. Their objection still stands, but because they aren't aware of the philosophical dialectic and the moves that people are making and the optics of framing it and preempt the requirement to preempt these standard responses that'll come up and things, it can make it look like, oh yeah, see, Bentham's Bulldog destroys another person by the made by God written in the stars argument or something. And no, he hasn't done that. He hasn't done that at all. He's just kicked the can down the road, and the objection still stands. And then he goes off and just writes another post about something else controversial and never comes back to the depth of the objection, which is still there sitting in the background. It's incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, was it you that gave me the example of one of the people criticizing him and he was fairly dismissive of their critiques?
Yeah, I think so. It could have been that simplicity post where he was like, "Oh, I'm just not using simplicity in that way," and then he comes up with like a special. Or was it a different one?
This was someone that was like an expert on the topic. They were like a PhD student that was doing their dissertation on a particular topic, and they were like, "Look, I don't think you really understand this topic super well," and he didn't seem all that interested in engaging with him. And I don't really know why. There could be good reasons for that.
Well, the problem is that I don't even know which one you're referring to, because this has happened so many times at this point, on different topics, and that's what.
Arguably, it's happening with me. A couple years ago, he had asked me if I wanted. It was like a comment on YouTube. He's like, "Hey, do you want to do a blog exchange on moral realism?" I didn't address it at the time. I don't know why. Maybe I was working on my dissertation or something. Who knows? But eventually I got around to responding to him, and I have 2 very long blog posts critiquing his views. And I don't really think he's responded to them. And typically when I make comments on meta ethics, even if so there'll be all these comments on a post, they'll respond to some, but then not others. And he might say, look, I don't like writing response posts. I find that a bit strange because he blogs so frequently.
And he does that all the time when it's convenient. And when people have big
also, would anyone think that if he didn't pop into my Discord server and say, "Hey, Lance, want a VC and just talk about this," that I'd be like, "No." I mean, there was a point because I blocked him for a while, so where I wouldn't have done that. But I'd be willing to talk to him about this stuff, but he doesn't want to talk to me. Now, nobody owes you a conversation, So if someone just goes, "Look, I just don't like you interpersonally. I don't like your style of conversation. Whatever. I think you're boring and uninteresting or annoying." Those are all good reasons to not talk to somebody. And if he thinks that about me, fair enough. So we could exclude me from this picture because those are legitimate reasons. I think those are perfectly fine reasons to not talk to somebody. You could not talk to somebody because you don't like them. That's fine.
But when it's happening as a pattern with experts in all of the topics that you're touching on, then maybe it becomes a bit more likely that you might be the problem rather than all of the people who have, expertise in the things that they're criticizing you.
He has, I'll put it this way. He has a suspiciously his interest in critics seems suspiciously selective to me.
Yes.
That's how it looks to me. It could be well motivated. I don't know, but I don't think he's doing. So I'll put it this way. It's not my problem. If he is going to not engage with his best critics at the level that, at a level that I think would make sense given the kinds of critics that have shown up, I think that's to his detriment because he can only grow from engaging with those critics. Real quick, I wanted to address this because someone threw money my way. This is a money situation.
Go ahead.
I got to give people attention when they do that. First of all, thank you very much. I don't know how to say your name.
Das ein.
Okay, so thank you very much. So the question is, did you ever check out Care Ethics from Carol Gilligan? I asked because it seems similar to your experimental philosophy approach, which you might like. So not exactly. I did teach healthcare ethics, and this might have been something that came up in there, or maybe it came up in a critique of Rawls. I don't know. I encountered this somewhere as an undergraduate, like a long time ago. It came up somewhere as a critique of philosophers that focus too much on certain aspects of ethics and not on other aspects of ethics. That's the only foggy recollection that I have from 20 years ago. So that's about all I got for you on that score. But if there is something similar in Carol Gilligan's work, I would be very happy to see that, especially because I have the impression that that stuff may predate experimental philosophy by quite a bit. So if you have something for me to look at, do let me know, and appreciate the comment. Thanks. Sorry, back to what were you up to?
One of the things, so what I was going to say was, so yeah, he's rejecting experts in a lot of these topics where they criticize him. And what the reason that is somewhat strange is because he's often engaging with people or accepting engagements with people where their profiles are very big and they might be less experts to comment on the sorts of things that he's engaging with, or where they're big and popular but more sympathetic towards his views. And that would seem to indicate that it's more about social expedience or growth and engagement and stuff over expertise, which is a little like I'm particularly referring to his lack of critical engagement with people like Scott Alexander, people like he got that piece published in like the New York Times, for example, or people like Richard Hanania, who there are many relevant and quite devastating criticisms of things that they've said that Matthew just will be completely fine with, which I think are much more problematic than the criticisms that he raises of entire fields of mathematics and their conceptions of simplicity as a non-participant in those fields, as a non-computer scientist or something. So that is all very suspicious to me and sort of frustrating, I guess. And the second thing I just want to say is I love your word pictures, so like the epistemic black hole and the epistemic blank checks and things that you've come up with. And yeah, for the epistemic black hole, I want to point out that it's not like this isn't even a particular accusation against like Matthew and his views. A lot of these philosophical systems are these like self-sealing. Part of the reason why I would say that they're bad or unscientific or something like that is because they're very bad at figuring out what's true and improving your views. They're about almost like self-sealing in assumption, like pre-theoretic conceptions or something like that, or what you intuit on something, by which, what does that mean? What you would just be predisposed to say if asked a question before thinking about it hard, or being aware of the relevant distinctions and things. And to give an example of another system that's like this, right? Think of Alvin Plantinga's notion of properly basic beliefs, and the way that gets used by Christian apologists such as William Lane Craig, where Craig is known for giving all these arguments for God's existence that he claims should rationally compel people to believe. But the reason that he believes those arguments in the first place, we know, is because of his commitment to the conclusion, right? So he says he was converted to the belief through this experience of God that he had. And then he came to develop all of these arguments, right? So he could show unbelievers why they're wrong. You can justify this and things. And then he says, and even if I found out all these arguments are wrong, it wouldn't matter because my justification is the self-authenticating revelation of the Holy Spirit, which is a defeater that defeats all defeaters, which is like, this ultimate intuition phenomenon. It's like, it's phenomenal. I don't know what to call it, like luxury communism. It's not conservative at all. It gives you everything in the world. And yeah, like that is another example of this like epistemic. Like once you're in a position where you're saying stuff like that, right? Like what checks are there? You're disconnected from any empirical observation, from any rebuke or rebuttal on your language, because whatever you feel privately, there's no constraints on that, is your determining factor in deciding what you want to think. Like
it's like a scoreboard. Imagine you have an MMA fight, and then it goes to a decision, and then you as a fighter get to assign any arbitrary amount of points to your side. Hey, I won every fight, and then people are like, you got knocked out in 4 seconds, and you're like, yeah, but I had 1 million points on my side. So what do you want me to do? I won the fight. Yeah. So like it's all fights go to a decision, and the decider is me. Now, and keep in mind that the evidence, like, so if you're weighing all the empirical evidence and all the publicly available evidence for and against a view that's like empirical, non-empirical, whatever it might be, they get to always put the evidential thumb on the scales in a way that's totally private. So if you and I can agree the quality of arguments for, say, libertarian free will, there's 100 units in favor of it and 130 units against it. Hey, all else being equal, we should reject libertarian free will. And then a person, let's say they say, look, but I feel like I have like 50 points in favor of it intuitively. So it ultimately wins. It doesn't win by much. It's 150 versus 130. How the hell do you know that? But also, like, two, how do I verify that?
Yeah,
like, how do I know?
How do even you verify that to yourself? I think is the question.
Right.
Because,
but like, I could just say, and as long as I'm outwardly sincere enough, I could have any intuition about anything.
Yeah. That is actually genuinely right. Like, what can be said about, like, what is I think it's almost like the private language argument point of private inner extension. Like, that's what you're doing. It's just whatever you say is the truth there, because
it's intuitive beetle in a box or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Intuition beetles.
What did you call them? You said like truth tingles. That was
yeah, what I suggest that people do is that every time a philosopher talks about intuitions or seemings or intellectual appearances, that you substitute in the word truth tingles or whatever the grammatical equivalent for the construction of the sentence that it's in. So what philosophers should say is, instead of saying, I find this response to the Gettier problem,
I have a seeming that.
Yeah, they should say, I feel truth tingles when I consider this claim, or I don't feel truth tingles when I consider this claim. In fact, my truth tingle system is totally silent. My faculty for detecting the tingly sensation of truth is not active in this situation. So if you start phrasing it that way, I think it looks obviously silly. And I think the reality of how they're using the term is, in many but not all instances, no less silly. It's like just as silly as that. They have some inscrutable, like they'll literally talk about a quasi-perceptual faculty for perceiving truth, perceiving it. Which organ are they perceiving with their brain?
Yeah. I don't even know what it means. I don't even know what it means to perceive truth, because truth is just a sentence I say, a word I say of sentences. Like, very curious.
I don't even look. They might mean this. If they mean this metaphorically, I'd like to know what it's a metaphor for. Like, what are they talking about? And if they mean this literally, then do they have detectable cognitive systems and apparatuses in place that allow them to do this? Because I don't think I have them. And so if they want to say they have a faculty I don't have, and keep in mind, people have suggested that I have brain damage. I mean, this is why I was joking about this at the start of the video. I'm conceptually impoverished. Okay, throw me in the fMRI. You show that you have systems in your brain that I don't have. Or is your intuitive faculty not facilitated by brain processes? I mean, give me a freaking break. It's not facilitated by brain processes. Then how the hell does it work? Like, there's no appreciation for the fact that if they have some sort of intellectual ability, that it should presumably be mediated by something that their nervous system is doing. And I want to know what that is. What exactly are you doing? And I don't know what they're doing. Yeah. They don't know what they're doing.
This is the problem as well.
It's amenable to this kind of scrutiny.
Even in terms of what you're saying there about like throw you in the fMRI and stuff, I think that this is the problem, is that from their point of view, it's a metaphysical thing. So it's not even that there would be physical differences. And so it's bloody, it's just completely uncheckable. There is no check. It's crazy.
I got another $5 from Gareed. And this is to follow up on my response. Gilligan's in a different voice used an empirical study of children to question Lawrence Kohlberg's universal concept of development of justice. Okay, so that does sound like experimental philosophy. That sounds super cool. And that's 1982. So it preceded, like, the rise of contemporary experimental philosophy is typically, I think, dated to 2001 with that paper on, is it like cross-cultural, or is this like a semantic thing? Like
the standard analytic epistemology one? Wasn't that like in the 90s or?
I think it's typically the 2001 paper, okay. But maybe I don't know.
No.
But yeah, this is cool.
Check that out. Yeah.
So we have comments here. Lance, isn't there something suspicious about all these claims about having these intuitions as evidence in plausibly odd contexts to have such strong intuitions? I think that's what Nathan is getting at, isn't it?
Yeah, it's firstly that it's very suspiciously convenient that all of so people who are prone to talk about this pseudo psychological faculty of intuitions, right? What they say about seemings, they introduce this word ramification, right? And so they say, like, they use the term. The other terms that they sort of like will induct you into using are things like thin and thick. So they will say like, oh, this is a thin concept, by which they mean there's very few claims embedded in that concept. Or they'll say this is a thick concept, by which they mean there's a lot of kind of like baggage, right, embedded in that concept. And when they talk about ramification of seemings, that is the language that they use to talk about what concepts come along with the seeming, right? So they might like a highly I don't even know what it would be like, but I'm just telling you the language that they use. A highly ramified seeming would be one that is accompanied by, say, several thick concepts. So I don't know, like you could look at an apple and that tells you the correct theory of consciousness and it solves the interaction problem, and it tells you, a theory about Aristotelian physics and how it's true. And you get all that just like from your intuition as you look at a red apple or something like that, right? That would be like a highly ramified seeming in their language. And yeah, my point is just that for the people who deploy this type of epistemology, right, they're frequently making these highly speculative and what I consider to be epistemically risky. They of course, this is question begging because they wouldn't say it's epistemically risky because they've adopted this methodology, but highly universal, fundamental metaphysical claims about the world that operate at the fundamental level of reality at all scales, everywhere at once, that have massive implications for complicated topics like cosmology and mind and causation, all these sorts of things. And it turns out that the way that they're able to understand and access these things is through their reading of the content of their intuitions. And these things often have entailments when taken together that I find that are very bizarre or in conflict with our best scientific theories in various sorts of ways. And that to me is just very suspicious that they have the exact intellectual seemings that do that on a variety of topics, right? I think there's that is an interesting fact in and of itself, right? What explains that? And maybe, I would say maybe what explains that is that it's a bad methodology, or that there are these social dynamics going on amongst people who adopt this type of methodology that lead to like edgy hot takes and things and production of content. That is one explanation on the table. Another explanation is that it's this great method for figuring out truth, and everyone else is missing out by not employing it. And then say let's evaluate these different theories. But yeah, I find it highly suspicious and very weird. And just one last point on that is that I think that this is part of the methodology of the sort of intuition pumps and things, is that you can specify a highly ambiguous story. You just tell a highly ambiguous story, and because you've left out all of the relevant and interesting details, then you're just able to basically like lead people towards the right answer because of the ambiguity of the sort of like story that you've told. And that's like just this really shoddy methodology. There's nothing of interest. Like the question is, how is it that I can tell an underspecified story and come to a weird conclusion? Well, very easily is the answer, right? Like it doesn't tell you anything about like metaphysics and ultimate truths. And
yeah, these underspecified stories, I think that this is one of the primary tools in the toolkit of philosophers in the form of thought experiments. I mean, if you take something like Mary's Room, I think the weirdness and the underdescription of it is actively misleading. And I think the same applies to Searle's Chinese Room. I don't know why all these thought experiments have to be in rooms, but you have a variety of instances of this where I think that many of these thought experiments become a kind of they become, I want to say like intellectual lightning rods. Like they're attractors. They have this magnetic quality that draws people to centering discussions around them. So it's very hard to get through a discussion about consciousness without somebody bringing up pea zombies or Mary's Room or whatever other standardized thought experiment you have. It's hard to get through a discussion about normative ethics without the trolley problem coming up. And I worry that the this strikes me as like clearly contingent. History could have gone differently. We didn't have to get stuck with the trolley problem. We didn't have to get stuck with Mary's room. We could have had some different set of thought experiments or standardized examples, but those are the examples that we got. And this points to me to a broader concern that I have with philosophy, which is that so much of it seems historically contingent. So the way that we approach philosophy, the problems we focus on, the way that we think about things, philosophers, they often seem to act like their intuitions come from outside the field, and then they bring them to bear, or they come into force on consideration. Like they have all their intuitions are in a box on the shelf. You do philosophy, and then we got a point where we need an intuition. Let's go to the box over there and get out the appropriate intuition, as if it isn't the case that all the intuitions are constantly being updated, shaped, and influenced by the fact that they're doing philosophy. And so the box is fully immersed in philosophy, and everything inside that box is being tweaked and modified and pulled and pushed around. But this happens at a much more fundamental level, because even if when they started philosophy, all the intuitions were over on a shelf, well, what determines what gets put onto that shelf? Are all humans equipped with the exact same set of pre-theoretical intuitions, aside from people with brain damage like me, apparently? I don't think so, but I mean, what I would say is, seems like that's an empirical question, because it seems like it's a question about how human cognition works. And then you have to have questions about, well, how is language influencing this? How is culture influencing this? If, Christianity hadn't ascended, and, it could have been a single emperor was effective in stamping out early Christianity and reinstituting paganism, and we would have no Christianity today. That could have been the case. Or it could have been, a few historical events went very differently, and the modern face of Western philosophy would be radically different than it is. And what you would find under those circumstances is that the philosophers, if they somehow converged on the similar methods to what we're using, it's not even clear they would converge on the same methods. So would we say, if history had gone differently, that philosophers would just have shitty, worthless methods? Only the current methods are the right methods, not all those other ones. But if they did somehow end up on the same methods, they would still have a different cultural zeitgeist in which their intuitions are being pushed in these contexts, and they would say very different things. So like people with like contemporary neo-Roman paganism are not going to think about issues in the same way as like people that are immersed in Christian influence. So if we don't know the counterfactuals of, had your culture influenced you differently, or had you had some other language dominated analytic philosophy, if it wasn't an Anglophone practice, but it was, some other language that's very culturally distinct, Mandarin or something like that, what would the face of philosophy look like? What would the contours of it be like? What kind of intuitions would people report? We don't know the answers to those questions. And I find it very puzzling that philosophers are so confident. It's not even like I would see them say, yeah, it wouldn't differ much. It's like they don't talk about it. It doesn't occur to them. It's like it doesn't matter at all. There's something very strange about that.
Yeah, so you've got the problem of the ambiguous thought experiments, right? But then you've got this problem of the legitimate terms that people are being told they ought to use to talk about these the correct answers to these thought experiments. You've got the problem that those terms, as you say, do not come out of a vacuum. Oh, yeah, you're still listening. Yeah, they don't come out of a vacuum. But the terms themselves are being taught to people through philosophy textbooks, through the philosophy seminar room, through argument, right? So they're being the use of the terms is being argued for, not sort of just presented neutrally as sort of like, here is a use of a term or something like that. And the problem with that is the ways that then introduces bias into people's understanding of these things. So, for example, there are a number of people who I have introduced to philosophy of mind, and I am so careful in how I introduce these terms to them, because I know, I can see that at first, and this is a very common experience. It's anecdotal, so I can't kind of like, generalize to everyone or something from this. But it's very common that people be like, hang on, what are these philosophers talking about here? Like, I've heard this word consciousness. So I'm thinking about my girlfriend, for example. She's a psychiatrist, right? And there's medical criteria for someone being conscious, right? And there's medical criteria for someone being conscious operationalized as these physical checks on their system. Like, for example, are their pupils dilating when you show it? That's what it is. And I'm like, no, that isn't what these because like we'd be listening to a philosophy podcast or something in the car. I'd be like, with Philip Goff or someone. I was like, no, that isn't how they're using it. You see, here's what they mean. And it's like, huh? And when you induct someone into the use of the word in the way that philosophers are using the word, you almost go, no, here's what's meant by consciousness. And then, you say something that's supposed to be a sensation that people have, the redness of red. And you're like, wait, what is that? Like, is that like a square sample of red? What brightness is it? What like shape is it? What, like I get like, there's a red thing. Is it like, is that it? Or do you mean that? And then they'll say, okay, and that's what I mean by consciousness, the redness of red. And consciousness, it can't be physically explained. It doesn't, just one billiard ball hitting another. And so the person who's learning about this word and what it means is having it baked into their understanding that it cannot be explained by something else. And so it's no wonder that then and then the next question you ask them in the next seminar is okay, so here's a story. Now we have a room where only one billiard ball is hitting another, and they find out about this. Now, do they see red? And they're like, oh, I know the answer. No, because there can't be consciousness, because we learned that consciousness the other day is that thing that can't be explained in that way. And it's like, very good. Your intuitions have guided you to the truth. It's like, no.
Yeah. This is something akin to the experience I had. There was, this was a formative moment for me when I was in an ethics class and I was reacting to the paired presentation of the switch case and the footbridge case, which is that, when I looked at the footbridge case, I was like, all right, well, it would maximize utility to push the person off the bridge, but I'd feel very icky doing that. I don't think I could get myself to do that. But what I didn't have a reaction of is it's wrong or it's right. I didn't have that reaction.
Right.
And there seemed to be an expectation that given the setup of a thought experiment, you're supposed to have a truth tingle in one direction or another. Sometimes there's an expectation that if you're thinking correctly, as if that makes any sense about these sorts of things, that you'll have like the correct truth tingle about it. I mean, this is still something I'm not, Matthew will still say stuff like, this statement's very intuitive. That claim is very counterintuitive. And, I've criticized him many, many times for this. And, someone that is pretty much unimpeachable for their brilliance and integrity, Joe Schmid from Majesty of Reason, who has, it's been over a year, I think, since he's popped in and said that I'm doing something. What is it, the thing about in your unrighteousness, concealing the truth?
Suppressing
the truth. Suppressing the truth. He hasn't been in here to say that, so he must be very busy. But he picked up on that point and has incorporated that into videos. I don't know if he got that from me. I don't remember. Or he got it from somewhere else. I don't think I'm the font of all the good ideas. I have like 2 good ideas, maybe. And mostly a bunch of just recycled, my same idea, but with 7 different names for it.
Right.
So, he's made that point, and I haven't seen Matthew update and modify how he speaks. He still will just say, it seems that this is the case, or this is intuitive. He doesn't say, I find this intuitive, or most reasonable people find this intuitive. Yeah. He hasn't updated his manner of speaking. And this is a manner of speaking, again, that professional philosophers engage in. It's sloppy. I thought, and I say this a million times, analytic philosophy is supposed to be about clarity, precision, and rigor. And it's none of those things in practice much of the time. There are philosophers that fully qualify and do a much better job than I'll ever do. Someone could say I'm nipping at all their heels, and there's going to be ones out there doing great work. But you see a lot of this sloppiness, and Matthew is exemplifying this when he keeps saying it's intuitive, it's intuitive, it's intuitive. It's unclear what he means by that, and he seems resistant to getting clear about what he means by that. And that's not going to help us. And this is something that I'll ask you because I posted a comment on, but he doesn't respond to me, so I don't know what he thinks. He'll talk about he'll talk about priors in Bayesian approaches as if there's like a correct fact of the matter about what your prior should be. I don't know if he thinks that or not, but
I think
what's going on there? Is that even a reasonable view to have?
It depends. Like these are quite fraught topics, right? Where it depends what. So, like when you say, "Is that a reasonable view to have?" The total information I have says that someone should not be thinking in that way, but I can understand how someone could very reasonably come to believing that and saying that, because even within statistics, there are people who say these sorts of things, right, at a at a professional level. So it's not like it's an unreasonable view. It depends very much on exactly what someone is saying. Now, so I think that the first thing to say about this is that there is this problem of like whether it's even intelligible to speak of like a pure prior, right? Like what does that mean? And I think that very much depends on propositional representationalist semantics being correct. Because there must be some way in which these sentences are meaningfully interpreted by a mind without language. Otherwise, it just can't make sense, this notion of the a priori. Or of, it must be the case that to ask someone, what is your prior probability in claim, right? There must be a sort of like linguistic independent fact of that meaning. Otherwise, it cannot be a priori. It must be after you've acquired a language, you have a bunch of evidence and information, right? Something like that. So there is that problem for whether or not it's meaningful. And I think that this becomes more clear in the applications that philosophers have, because the types of theories that philosophers are investigating tend to be sort of these ultimate theories of everything, which are supposed to be from, say, like, taking off the perspective of our universe from before, different possible worlds, talking metaphysically from the mirror of nature itself, sort of thing, rather than, in a well operationalized scientific setting where this would make sense, is you might say, for a test like a medical test, a pap smear or a HIV test, something like that, there is a precision and a specificity which tells you basically like your likelihood of getting a precision and specificity of the test, which tells you your likelihood of getting a true positive given you actually have the disease, versus you get a negative given you've got the disease, versus everything else, which entails the opposite claims. But then your priors here are empirical, right? They're informed by the base rates in the population, so they're not like they're not a priori known. They're known prior to this piece of evidence, but they're not known. They're not like prior to any conception of evidence or in some like pure sense, or they're actually very empirically informed and taken to dependent on a whole lot of different claims bunched together. So you got to ask, like, is this the way that philosophers are, say, approaching with this use of Bayesianism for these theories? Well, is it like that empirical sense where we have like these actual frequencies of incidences in a population, and we have a trust in the method for finding out the base rate in the population, that we can depend on and put confidence in? Or is it like potentially unintelligible speculation? And I think I lean more towards the like unintelligible speculation point of view, where I just don't even know what it's supposed to mean a priori. There's further problems for this in terms of like what in psychology is called harking, or sort of like hindsight bias, where for most of the people who are using these Bayesian arguments, they already have very well considered views of the topics involved. They've already engaged with a whole ton of the evidence. And so they're sort of like, they're telling a narrative, a story about someone who is in a situation where they have a prior and they believe a certain likelihood, they come across some piece of evidence, and that's how they should update. But it's not clear who this person is, and it's definitely not them as well. Like, they're telling themselves a story about their justification, but it isn't actually true for them because they already had considered this evidence and have beliefs about it. So, I mean, there's a lot more problems. It looks like you've got something you want to say on this. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. They're not actually doing the process they're describing. They're describing an imaginary person doing the process, and it's like a normative claim. Like, this is how this imaginary person should update in response to the evidence. I'm sorry, but what the fuck? That's how you reach conclusions about things? I'm sorry, that sounds insane. But then also, like, my understanding of what how if someone asked me what a prior was, and I don't do philosophy of statistics, I don't know that, but like, it seems to me like a prior is a psychological fact about your current level of confidence, and that's it.
Well, I think even in that case, there's dispute amongst statisticians about how you'd think about this, right? So within the sort of like philosophy of statistics and what would be called like empirical modeling, some people think that the only appropriate way to think about things in terms of these credences is where we're talking specifically about guiding action, right? So where there is some specific action or risk on the line. Whereas when it just comes to like claims, like propositional claims or something like that, it's not even appropriate to really think about it in those terms. Is one way that some people they'll say, actually, you should use some of these tests instead, or these ways of thinking about things, because then it forces you to, like say with a frequentist test, it forces you to think about the experimental setup and what that says about the world, and that puts certain constraints on your engagement with the problem, where you can't just kind of like randomly stipulate stuff by saying my hypothesis is this.
Sounds like pragmatism.
Yeah, and this is actually what I like. There's a philosopher of statistics called Deborah Mayo. She's got a book, Statistical Inferences, Severe Testing, and what she discusses is this idea of, people will talk about like disputes between frequentists and Bayesians in statistics. She says that actually and people, other statisticians, there's a book called Statistics as Principled Argument, for example, and I think Ronald Fisher, this is actually his view of statistics, is that it's a type of an empirically informed debate, really, is how he thinks of the field of statistics. The idea, Deborah Mayo's idea, is that what statistics is a bunch of tools and frameworks which can give you a load of severe tests that you can apply to some claim. And those severe tests will enable you to interrogate and probe that claim. But there isn't like some sort of like overall fact of the matter about like one of these tests being like the truth and the correct way of because there's so many contextual details in which these things can fail to apply, or where there are trade-offs between the virtues you get out of one of these methods versus the others, depending on what you're kind of trying to do. And I think she's basically broadly right about this. I think that, again, this I think just shows the sort of differences between people who are using these tools in actual scientific contexts. So, in engineering contexts, in physics, in social sciences, in psychology, to do empirical investigations where there's something at stake, right? Like if you have messed up your theory, it's not going to work now to do a thing that you want it to do. Like if you've abused your p-values, you've now come up with an engineering process where you've not identified the factors that are going to lead to engines cracking, and planes are going to start falling out of the sky, right? You're going to engineer planes where the engines blow up and fall. So there's consequences to it. The difference between these cases and the philosophical case is that there's no check on whether or not you have correctly. There's no pragmatic success is cashed out in terms of your colleagues letting you get away with it and letting you publish and being able to continue appearing on podcasts, say. But there's no further check into these incentives still affect the sciences. I think that they're responsible for a lot of because people either aren't replicating things or they're not being careful enough to there's kind of like publishing mills that are disconnected from doing anything with the theories. Like they do affect the sciences, but the difference is that at least in a lot of cases it's still connected to that to some outcome that isn't just a verbal dispute between people. It's actually an activity that we care about, and so that's why I think the sciences here should be the guide about what counts as a good method. And then you've got these philosophers just kind of like borrowing this stuff because it gives this impression of rigor and formalism. And they're like, look, I'm like them. I'm a nuclear physicist, and I figured out I should be treated with the same respect as a nuclear physicist because I use this notation. But there's no constraints on their application, and that leads them to making all these mistakes and not taking other views. It's really incredibly frustrating. Yeah.
And then meanwhile, they'll shit on the sciences like they're inferior to their fantastical philosophical methods, and get all super, pat themselves on the back about how great what they're doing is. And it's like, I look at this and I'm like, yeah, and scientists are like building bridges and curing diseases and actually doing something. And like, what the hell are you doing? And it's not to say that philosophers can't or haven't contributed practically to the world, but I mean, good Lord, so many of them don't even seem to be trying. And, I'm supposed to somehow be impressed with this tower of achievements that they have that exist in some ethereal realm, and I'm not. And I don't know. I've presented this passage a few times. It's right at the beginning of Horwich's book, Wittgenstein's Metaphilosophy. It's that it's a letter that Wittgenstein sent to a friend, and he says something like, "My father was a businessman. I want philosophy to be businesslike. I want it to get things settled. I want it to get something done." And I've presented that characterization of how one could approach philosophy, and a few philosophers have recoiled at that. That seems repugnant to them, like making philosophy business-like. No, what we're doing is, I mean, it's almost like they think, we want to approach philosophy like we're the like dwarves and Tolkien, and we just want to build do some engineering project, and they're the elves, and it's far too lofty for them to have to build something. And there's something about that is just very frustrating to me. This idea that what you're doing is too lofty to get dirty. There's something, I mean, if people have spoken of this many, many times, but there's something palpably pretentious about it and self-satisfied that I don't like that vibe. I think it has that vibe. And one of the worst things is, philosophers don't pay attention to self-selection effects. They talk, oh, well, we all have these intuitions. Yeah, well, that's because they pretty much like bully and pressure people that don't think about things the way that they do. But also, if your field gives off the vibe of being this jargonized, pretentious dreck, people aren't going to want to be part of it. And it seems pretty obvious to me. See how I said to me? And of course I could be wrong. I'm making an empirical claim that people that could contribute an enormous amount to the quality of philosophy, their disposition leads them to go be engineers and biologists and physicists. And, many of those people, could they somehow be convinced to pursue careers in philosophy, I think could do an extraordinary amount of good because of their systematic, rigorous, no nonsense, practical approach to problem solving. That approach to problem solving is discouraged actively by analytic philosophers because they cultivate this mindset that what they're doing is too lofty for that. And then, so they keep out all the people that don't buy into their approach, and then they go, look, we're the experts, so clearly this is the right approach. What? I mean, this is insane. I've made this point before, but it's like if you went to an astrology convention and the astrologers say, we're the experts on astrology, so clearly astrology works. 99% of us agree astrology works. And then imagine a group of people were like, hey, we're here because we don't accept astrology. You're not going to get invited to the conference. I mean, philosophers do this, and then come on, they don't notice they're doing this. I'm supposed to believe.
Oh, sorry.
They don't notice they're doing this. They don't notice the self-selection effects. They don't notice that they're potentially driving people away that have a different intellectual disposition. They don't notice.
I think that we have to concede that some of these things are, some of these features are relevant in all human social dynamics, collection systems where people have beliefs, so that they're also prevalent in the sciences and they cause all sorts of problems. It's just that there is an asymmetry between the two disciplines because of the different practices in the sciences. But I think there are still serious problems around and I know you agree with this, around the way that the sciences are practiced, things like peer review and prestige in journals, and questions of meta science that people are dealing with broadly. Absolutely think that the sciences can be approved too. I just think there's this big asymmetry between the two places. And another Wittgenstein quote in a similar vein is, this sort of thing has got to be stopped. Bad philosophers are like slum landlords. It's my job to put them out of business. That's one I quite like.
That's a little harsh. I have a good one from F.C.S. Schiller, the early pragmatist contemporary of William James that everybody seems to have forgotten about. And I'll just say this real quickly. I encountered Schiller through a colleague of mine who wrote their dissertation on Schiller's work, and they're working to revive awareness of Schiller's work. Schiller wrote quite a lot. It's good writing. It's good ideas. And in their letters and exchanges, it's very clear William James considered Schiller a colleague, a partner, and he basically said something like, our views are the same. They're just expressed differently. So Schiller is a fantastic philosopher that people seem to have forgotten about. So I have a quote from him, as long as I could find it. I posted a lot of stuff.
I think you put it on Substack, right? Did you put it on Substack?
I did. Here it is. Is not the whole industry of philosophy one long illustration of philosophic audacity in manipulating language? And does not experience show that philosophers frequently get away with their arbitrary modifications of, quote, the meaning of words and, quote, propositions? I mean, you're seeing some very proto-Wittgensteinian stuff decades before Wittgenstein. I don't know the exact date of the publication. Maybe it's not that long before.
Well, let me tell you, Cheryl Misak, in her book, actually, let me find it 1 second. You carry on.
I don't carry on about what? Okay, I'll talk to the chat. What's up, everybody? So Alex Malpass, thanks for stopping by. I don't know if you're still around, but yeah, we started by talking about the Danny and Jordan Peterson conversation, and then we talked a bit about Bentham's newsletter. I mean, so the blog is called Bentham's newsletter, and then the name is Bentham's Bulldog, and we were critiquing some of his metaphilosophy, and really I see it as a very public display of much of the metaphilosophy that is in practice among at least some contemporary analytic philosophers. I will say, as an aside, and I see that you're back, so I'll wrap up that idea here. I know I focus on criticizing analytic philosophers, but there's lots of analytic philosophy that I like. Like, it's not like I never read anything where I'm like, oh, that's a good point, or oh, that's a cool idea. I really like the work of Edouard Maschery. I think his work is great. I love Stephen Stitch's work, Dan Dennett. So there are quite a lot of philosophers whose work I regularly, but I'll note in all of these cases, Dan Dennett relies extensively on empirical data in supporting his case about consciousness. Edouard Maschery does experimental philosophy and relies extensively on empirical work. Stephen Stitch does moral psychological research and does extensive empirical research alongside doing philosophy, and it had a big influence on starting experimental philosophy. So in all of these cases, there's no surprise that there are proclivities aligned with my own interests, but I think all of them would typically be identified to a significant extent with analytic philosophy, and I think that's reflected in at least a large portion of their work. And so it's not like I don't think analytic philosophers do incredible work. I mean, all of their work is going to outshine all of mine forever. So they do better work than me. So when I am criticizing analytic philosophy, it's not because I think we need to gut the whole enterprise. It's because I think that you have pockets of what's going on within the field that are great and empirically well-informed, and pockets that I have issues with. And when I'm criticizing the field, I'm criticizing some of those pockets. Now, I will say a lot of those pockets have a kind of a hierarchical ascendancy. So, when I was applying to graduate school, I don't know if I was discouraged from saying I was interested in experimental philosophy, but I had the strong impression that it counted against me quite a bit. And so it seems more polarizing. It seems like a lot of people have a lukewarm and in some cases negative attitude towards it. Whereas if I were doing, history, philosophy, or metaphysics, I don't think that would have been maligned by a significant number of people. So, there are subcultures within the field, and I'm more in alignment with some of them than others.
So the book that I was referring to is this one, Cambridge Pragmatism by Cheryl Misak. A really good book where the idea is that there's the two Cambridges, Cambridge in the US and Cambridge in the UK. And so it begins with a talk of these US philosophers. So William James, so Peirce, James, and F.C.S. Schiller. So I don't know if you probably can't see that, right? Can you make that out? The chapters. Oh, I think you're maybe muted, Lance. But
oh no, I can't. I think I saw the word Peirce at the beginning.
Oh. Yeah. So you've got Peirce, James, F.C.S. Schiller, Victoria Welby, C.K. Ogden, and actually Dubois is. Anyway, the point is that there's a good chapter on F.C.S. Schiller in there as well. It talks, it goes through some of his letters where he's quite angry about about the way that philosophy is being practiced, and then it goes over to Cambridge, England, and it talks about a lot of these people who people are maybe more familiar with, particularly if they've been inducted into like analytic philosophy. So how this is received by Russell, and how he's like initially kind of very upset by these views, but she even argues that he kind of comes around to these views in his later thinking. Frank Ramsey, and then Wittgenstein and Wittgenstein's late views, and she talks about how they're influenced by Frank Ramsey, and how that kind of forms his view. So if people are kind of interested in the Wittgenstein's metaphilosophy stuff and the pragmatism stuff, this is like a really good resource, I think, for understanding some of those intellectual connections and the different ways that people have thought about this stuff.
That's cool.
And someone asked as well about the philosophers, Deborah Mayo. Deborah Mayo, Statistical Inference as Severe Testing is what that book's called.
Oh, right. There was another topic I wanted to bring up, but I think I don't have the energy for it now.
No worries.
I'll say what it is. We'll see if I'll have to address it more later. There was a Twitter exchange. So someone over on Twitter, someone named Matt Olma, said, well, it was a nice run, but I don't think I'm a moral realist anymore. Add it to the growing list of things that would be cool, but probably isn't. And, he went on to say, I want it to make sense. Sad face, I really do. And then he said something interesting. He said, I don't get what it means to say, quote, I have a reason to X, when that reason isn't tied to anything about me, my goals, preferences, desires. To borrow from Lance Bush, it almost seems like bad grammar or an incomplete sentence, e.g., put the shoes. So that's cool. It's cool to see that, someone has apparently become an anti-realist, or is like losing their faith in realism, or whatever, however you might think to characterize it. And that some of the similar sort of reasoning may be a factor there. It's not super clear to me. But Matthew ended up responding to a chain of discussion that followed from this. I'm trying to find it. Whoopsie. Okay. I know someone sent me the link.
Can I make a prediction about what it is while you're looking? I'm gonna guess.
Sure, make a prediction.
It's gonna be a rebuttal to someone being sympathetic towards what's being said, of the nature, well, obviously some claim is objectively morally wrong, or it would be crazy to deny that this is objective. I'm gonna get maybe no,
that's not what ended up happening. You got part of it right. Somebody that was sympathetic to this view, Outsider Humanist, made a similar remark. So let me see. There's a long exchange here, but Outsider Humanist ends up saying, yes, I reject that class of reasons for reasons that I'm sure you'd have an equally insubstantial answer to. But then there's no such thing as a defeater, as you can always make up new things or cast more words like sand into your interlocutor's eyes. Maybe I'm not much of a philosopher, as I'm not interested in playing that game for its own sake. Now, Outsider Humanist seems to be arguing about this topic as well. And what Matthew ends up saying is this. So he says, a reason for action is something that increases the worthwhileness of an action. It counts in favor of the action. For example, the fact that pressing a button would prevent lots of extreme suffering gives you a reason to press it. So I still remain mystified what Matthew means by that. So the fact that pressing a button would prevent lots of extreme suffering gives me a reason to press it. So what does it mean that it gives me a reason?
Not if you're Carl Panzram. Sorry, you make the point. Carl Panzram was a guy who was basically crazy, and he wanted to cause a war between Britain and America that would destroy all of humanity. So he tried to scupper a Royal Navy ship in New York Harbor or something to try to bring about this war.
A war that would kill everyone?
Yeah, because he'd gone crazy and just hated people. He was put in prison then as a murderer, and he'd kill guards and things. Just someone whose values were such that he wanted. If you gave him a button that would kill everyone, he would push it. But
did his approach work?
No, because he ended up he got the death penalty. I think he killed.
So he didn't wipe out. He didn't destroy the world.
Oh yeah. Well. It depends on your seeming. I have a seeming that he did destroy the world, but
I saw this video that was trying to be creepy, and it said something about how the world ended or something in 2019, And
Oh,
none
like
of this
Mandela
is-
effect, sort of, or yeah.
I don't know. It was fun. I was like, yeah, I'm into this. This is fun. This is a cool, like, fake conspiracy thing that's probably, hopefully, intended as a joke. All right. So, so I'm looking at this. So a reason for action is something that increases the worthwhileness of an action. What on earth is worthwhile? It has higher worthwhileness. Can we quantify worthwhileness? So some actions have like 10 units of worthwhileness. Some actions only have 2. Maybe some actions are negative, like they have negative worthwhileness. Who knows what that means? And then he says it counts in favor of the action. Now, Parfit in On What Matters just says, yeah, look, when I say I have a reason, I mean counts in favor. But really, so Parfit is just up front. He's like, there's no non-circular way of saying this. This means that means this means that. And he attributes to Bernard Williams, although from looking at some of Bernard Williams' commentary on the issue, it's not clear to me that Bernard Williams actually thought this. So it's possible Parfit was just misattributing thoughts to other people. But he says Bernard Williams thinks this is unintelligible. And so do I. But this goes on, and this is where I get frustrated with what Matthew says. So Outsider Humanist responds, and I haven't actually read this response yet. The fact might give me a reason, and he says in parentheses, explain my potentially pressing it by making it more worthwhile to me. What do these terms mean without appeal to my motivation? They become empty signs. You guys keep coming up with more words. Worthwhileness is a new one to me that mean the same thing and break down the same way. They're always stance dependent or lacking in content altogether. So this person is kind of, just saying, look, from their perspective, for you to have a reason is just in terms of how they understand that would have to be connected to your motivation or your stances in some way. And so to talk about a stance independent reason seems like it's like an empty set. It's like that. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So it seems vacuous to them. Maybe they would say that it seems like an oxymoron. It's like saying something that you find delicious but not delicious. Like it doesn't make sense. So the way that Matthew responds is he says, if you're confused by some term used by lots of experts and ordinary people, you should suspect that you're confused, not that they're just speaking gibberish.
Yeah. Frustrating.
So when someone says, look, in virtue of the way I have, like, my concepts, the way I understand things, the thing you were saying sounds nonsensical. So it'd be like, it's like, okay, I think I understand what it means for something to be a square. And you're telling me there's a sideless square. And I say, what is that? And they say it's a square, but it has no sides.
Yeah.
And then I would say, okay, well, given how I understand a square, it's got to have sides. And you're like, no, this is a sideless square. This is a square for sure. Trust me, but it has no sides.
One without sides.
Yeah, but it is a square. It just doesn't have sides. And then if I say, I don't think that makes sense, I think you're confused and saying something nonsensical. What Matthew is doing is the equivalent of someone saying, look, if you don't understand what a sideless square is, and so many of the experts over here believe in sideless squares, and we all understand it perfectly fine, you should defer to our expertise. I mean, look at what he says. If you're confused by some term. Why is he saying if you're confused by some term? He's just presuming, hey, so the person is saying, I don't agree with you. My concepts are different. And Matthew just presumes they're the confused one. Well, Matthew, I can't be confused. You're the confused one. So if you're confused by some term used by lots of experts and ordinary people, hey, Matthew, where is the fucking empirical evidence that ordinary people use the notion of reason that you're talking about here? You present that empirical evidence to me. Present the empirical evidence.
It wouldn't matter to him anyway.
Has absolutely zero fucking empirical evidence for this. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. He has no empirical. What's he going to do? Run a Twitter poll? Give me a freaking break. So he's going to have, I shouldn't say absolutely zero. I don't mean that literally. He's able to provide anecdotal data. He's able to provide, like Twitter polls. These are not going to be valid measures. They're not going to be rigorous, science. He's not going to get these, published in peer-reviewed journals. Maybe he will. And then maybe I'll say, good point. But it hasn't happened yet. So he's just saying ordinary people think this way. This is armchair psychology. Mm-hmm. This is armchair psychology. This is not rooted in anything other than anecdotes and vibes and stuff like that. And, Matthew will say stuff like, well, it seems to me that most people think this way. I mean, this is a very weird thing to say is an intuition. It's almost like, imagine if I say, well, it's my intuition that most people have this intuition. That's a very weird thing to have an intuition about. Are intuitions a reasonable approach to?
You would say, well, it's just a standard, it's a proposition. They can have an intuition about a proposition. Yeah, like, I don't.
It's an empirical claim.
It's like, why would your intuition be informative as to what some population, you know, like, well, maybe he would say, well, it's because it's not just an intuition; it's informed by my empirical observations. But then it's like, yeah, but where's the representativeness coming from in that intuition?
Right. But Matthew has cited that paper, that the paper that's titled something like "The Folk Probably Think What You Think They Think," and it's not a very convincing paper. I mean, it's a cool study idea, but he cited that paper, and then when Joe Schmidt and I both critiqued the methodology behind that paper and how it doesn't really support. I mean, Matthew almost seemed like he was leveraging that paper to dismiss the need for any empirical data at all in experimental philosophy. That, look, the paper is called "The Folk Probably Think What You Think They Think," so the folk probably think what I think they think, as if that, like, a cute title is going to settle the matter. And one study. I mean, Matthew presumably is a fan of Astrocodex 10 and Scott Alexander's work, and he has that thing, beware the man of one study. Matthew in this case is being the man of one study, and that's not cool. But it's just this presumption of confusion, and there's something to be said for what Matthew's saying here. You have a group of very, very smart people that are all using this notion of reason, and there are not very many people that don't use this notion of reason. There aren't very many people. There probably are a lot of people that don't use the notion. There are not a lot of people that question its intelligibility. So people like myself and like 2 people on Twitter are an extreme minority. And so all else being equal, I do think it's reasonable to leverage that fact. So, credit where it's due. I think Matthew is right to say there are many, many, many more people that appear to use this concept meaningfully than people that think it's not meaningful. So do you have thoughts on that? I'm saying a lot.
No, I reckon, like, by the way, just so you know, Alex Malpass said he is free, apparently, so he may or may not join. Sent him the link, if that's okay. I don't know. We'll see if he joins. Maybe you're tired, though.
Oh, I see. He's up on the stage. Should I add him?
Oh, yeah. If he's in the background. Cool.
Oh, sure. I'm happy to add him. But I guess Alex, I'll add you in 1 second. I'll just make a last comment on this. Matthew just says you should suspect that you're confused, not that they're just speaking gibberish. Like, if you're confused, you should suspect that you're confused. I mean, already think about the remark, how sloppy that is. Yeah. Look at his conditional. If you're confused by some term used by lots of experts and ordinary people, you should suspect that you're confused, not that they're just speaking gibberish. So already Matthew is just sloppy at describing things. If you're confused, you should suspect you're confused. If you're confused, you are confused. You certainly should do more than suspect it. So, I mean, presumably he means something like, in the first case, by confused. He's probably equivocating in the meaning of confused.
Or no, I'd say maybe it's like, if you want to develop good heuristics such that if you are actually confused, you will suspect that you're confused or something. I don't know. Like, I don't know what he's.
I think he's saying if you don't appear to understand something, like, I think the first sense of confused is if you're not sure what something. So let's rephrase it. If you're not sure what people mean, you should suspect that the reason you're not sure is because you have a misunderstanding of those people. So I do think what he's saying makes sense, but I do think his language is sloppy, his choice of words, because you have to interpret the word confused to mean something different in both cases in order for that to make sense, which is unfortunate that he worded it that way. There's a lot more to say about this, but I'll add Alex and see what he's got to say.
Yeah.
What's up?
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Yeah, good.
Cool. Yeah, it sounded like what you were talking about a minute ago was almost like him saying something like, if you think you're confused, you probably are confused, right? Well, I kind of feel like if I think I'm confused, then I kind of am, by definition. How could I think I'm confused, but it turns out I'm not confused? Do you know what I mean? It's like thinking
unless
that you're
from a different person's point of view.
Yeah.
If I think you're confused, you should suspect you're confused.
Yeah, you should. I probably am. At this time of night, I definitely probably am.
Do you want to? Is there any thoughts on the stuff that you have listened to us talking about, or any different topics you want to discuss, or anything like that?
I think I missed the bit where you talked about Adelstein's metaphysics, and maybe you can give me a quick précis of what you were saying about that, because I'm quite curious.
Overall, it's about basically there's a few things going on. One of which is that he is quite consistently publishing sort of like heterodox hot takes on a range of subjects, ranging from, you know, like your traditional sort of like philosophical topics to political topics to psychological topics to theological topics, right? And there's a common sort of methodology that he's employing in these cases, which is that you know, they almost all follow the like clickbait title sort of thing, like, you know, it's not what you think or whatever, and the methodology just almost always bottoms out in some claim of phenomenal conservatism. So like there'll be some sort of like Bayesian argument that's given, and we talked about the problems with the ways that these Bayesian arguments are being used, because often there's just not well-defined priors, and so it's sort of like anything goes. There's a lot of problems with like hindsight bias informing those priors and things like that. And then when you get into like questioning the concepts that he's employing, or even like the premises that go into establishing the sort of like likelihoods he wants to say exist, what you basically get is, well, it just seems to me that, and then you get some kind of like highly specific contentious claim that seems to him to be a particular way, which could be, I mean, look, I think he's probably sincere in saying this, and he's probably, but I think what explains why he has all of these, what he takes to be intuitions, and he doesn't interrogate whether or not intuitions are, you know, is that an actual psychological faculty, or is that a word he's saying for a whole host of experiences that he's having, you know? And he doesn't ask the question, for all these intuitions that I have, where they're all sort of like what people are telling me, or, you know, where it seems to a lot of other people, I'm confused, where it seems I'm taking all these risky commitments, what people are telling me are risky commitments that are highly specific about universalizable metaphysics and stuff. Well, it's awfully convenient that I have all the right intuitions that just happen to conjointly combine together to give me these, you know, conclusions that I'm landing on. Is there a different way of explaining that other than that these are truth tracking that might be going on? And he just kind of doesn't engage in any of that, because he's like, no, phenomenal conservatism tells me, you know, and absent any defeater, and my intuition is impervious to the defeaters that I've been provided with, and so forth. So, yeah.
That's right. I think the whole notion of intuition in this type of area is really, really quite suspect, isn't it? Like, it's so dubious what's going on when someone says they have an intuition that a proposition is true or something. And I think that I think you guys are quite skeptical as well. I'm not sure that we necessarily see it all the same way, but I actually genuinely don't know. So part of what I think about this, at least, is that intuitions kind of I think I'm okay with them to the extent that they're quite proximate to humdrum everyday things. Like, I think something like I have an intuition about something that I'm quite well attenuated to, you know, like, for instance, this is not quite the same use of the word intuition, but like, I try and play chess and try and learn and get better at it. And after a while, there is this sort of chess terminology use of the word intuition, where you talk about having an intuition to play a move before you've done the calculation that actually demonstrates that it's the best move. You can kind of learn sort of the patterns, and it gives you something like a feeling that you should play this move. And I think people think that something like that is going on, that they, you know, maybe, I mean, I don't know, have intuitions about like when to open the door, or I don't know, stuff about like navigating through the everyday world or something. But that use of intuition presumably is like reasonably okay, right? We don't really worry about that too much. It's when philosophers talk about having intuitions about things that are like far beyond that realm of everyday experience, the sort of thing you could like be trained to reliably know about, like in the way I can sort of with chess moves or something, when they're starting to say things like, well, my intuition says that there couldn't be infinitely many typewriters or something, and he's like, well, what do you mean your intuition? How do you have a feeling about that? Like, you couldn't possibly train yourself, right? Like, this is so divorced from practices and things we actually do. I just don't understand. Like, maybe you've got that feeling, but is it reliable in any way? Like, that's the real question, right? Like, and so I think, somehow intuitions, or this talk about having intuitions, but maybe people do feel like they want to say that they couldn't be infinitely many. Maybe it just feels good to them to say there couldn't be infinitely many typewriters, and they call that an intuition. But at that point, I'm just thinking, like, this could have come unstuck from reality at any point, right? There's no reason to think that this is like tracking anything apart from just their feeling. So that's the way I'm skeptical about the use of intuitions in this sort of context. Is that similar to how you guys look at it too?
Feel free to go first.
Yeah, definitely for me. And I actually really like the chess example. I don't play a lot of chess, but I actually use that example of, I use chess, I use building bridges, I use people preparing food for others. And all of these cases, the sense of intuition that you develop in those cases, that kind of that feeling before you've really done, you haven't reasoned it through, you haven't done all the calculations, but you just have, I got to do this. That works in those cases, but it works for important reasons. You get feedback, and we have this comment here that perfectly encapsulates that from the dude. As long as there's a process that can punish wrong intuitions can be okay. In all of those cases, like, you get good at chess by getting feedback from people, from playing people that are better than you, and they beat you, and you learn, and you recalibrate, and you internalize. So you're shunting a lot of those processes off into the unconscious, and it's doing the work for you, and then some of that bubbles up, and you're able to have these intuitions. But in the cases you're describing, these cases are so divorced from the real world that you never get that kind of feedback, and so there's not really a way to like calibrate your intuitions. And yet that's exactly where Matthew is employing all these intuitions in these non-calibrated, highly abstract circumstances.
Right. So I regard the talk of intuitions in things like metaphysics is kind of just irrelevant. Like, it doesn't matter. It shouldn't sway you in any way. The most that it can play is if you're deploying an argument where dialectically the interlocutor shares your intuitions on a given premise. It just means that you can kind of brush over that one when laying out all of the reasons for thinking that the premises are true, because it's like, well, we both think this is true, so let's move on to the next one, the contentious one or whatever. So I think sometimes there's like this appeal to intuitions that just it doesn't mean the premise is more likely to be true. It just means we're less likely to dispute between us about whether or not the premise is true. And in that case, it kind of plays that role dialectically. And maybe, is that okay? Maybe that's okay.
That's how I think. I think about intuition claims as being like very transparent, right? In the sense that if someone tells me they have an intuition about something, they've not told me. All they've told me is like they believe something, or like it doesn't do anything else for me from that point of view. And I agree with what you're saying. To the sense that like the role it plays is to like signal, I take this to be uncontroversial or something like that. But I don't think that there is. This is what Lance calls like a pseudo psychological faculty or something. Like that. I think what does a lot of the work here is maybe because people use this word intuition, they either build some sort of like metaphysical account behind it, or a psychological account of sort of like that there is a power of the mind to intuit things that is sort of like univocal across uses of this intuition term. So if it's legitimate for me to, if you will, assent to my use of intuition sometimes, well then if I'm using the same psychological faculty in these other cases, you should assent to it as well. It's just the same faculty that's at play, right? And I think the issue is that I don't think that there is anything like that. I think I'm saying the word intuition, but there's a whole bunch of different things that are going on. Like, as you say, it might be something I've got a whole lot of experiences with. So I have like a very robust kind of causal model that informs my ability to say, some kind of like sentence that is approximately right, and I'm very confident in it without doing a whole lot of thinking or something, right? And so when I say I have an intuition that X in that sort of like normal context, it's perfectly like It's just like, cool, yeah, and actually we don't need to dispute that in this case. Now we might need to dispute it, and because you might have good reasons that you disagree. But if we do so, I think it just won't be good enough for me to sort of go, but I used my intuition and like appeal to this faculty as if it's like a, you know, this impervious black box, when we then are going to have to actually get into providing some psychological account of like, well, what is it? Like, is there some necessary feeling to that? Where does that feeling come from? As you say, is that feeling like truth tracking, or are there reasons to think that my confidence in this case is well proportioned, or that it's going to come apart because it's, you know, it's a context which I don't have a good causal model of, or there's a lot of complexity in, you know, all sorts of considerations like that. So it just gets far too much of a free pass, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like people think it's a kind of well, there's stick things that people hold to try and like go towards water or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, dowsing rod. Yeah.
Housing rod.
Yeah, right. Like intuition is this thing that points you in the right direction somehow, and it's kind of a mystery, but you just follow it and it's good. Maybe there's some idea of it being, I don't know the literature on this, so maybe this is already obvious, but like, is intuition like explicable in terms of sort of cognitive, like reducing the cognitive load by making shortcuts to stuff and not calculating and, you know, making good guesses and saving time, that type of thing?
There is empirical research that uses the term literature to talk. Uses the term intuition to talk about that sort of thing. Use the term literature. Use the term intuition. So you're going to see like stuff like dual process models of cognition, system 1, system 2 processing, and they'll sometimes talk about system 1 as the intuitive system. But those are psychologists that have very little crosstalk with philosophers. They do not use the term intuition in those sorts of models in the same way that philosophers are using it. So there is literature on understanding intuitions in the way that you describe, but that might as well be a different word. When philosophers talk about intuition, they run the gamut of using the term or characterizing or supporting use of the term, so both descriptively and prescriptively, in the mundane ways that you said that you don't have an issue with. So you have people like Timothy Williamson, when he writes about metaphilosophy, although I think he likes to call it philosophy of philosophy. Yeah. He's like, yeah, look, it's just continuous with our other psychological processes. It's totally mundane stuff. Nothing to see here. It's just, you know, philosophers maybe are a little quirky with the language they use, but they're just talking about beliefs and dispositions to believe things. When we're talking about those intuitions, I have no problem with that. If you're talking about hunches from internalized expertise, if you're talking about, you're just using it as a way of characterizing belief, or saying, look, I'm pulled towards or drawn towards this belief, but maybe I don't actually believe it. Those are all, I think that's all going to be consistent with our understanding of contemporary cognitive science. But you then have philosophers that they're not integrating their use of the term intuition with the empirical literature of like dual process models of cognition, and they're not using it in those mundane ways, or at least they don't appear to. They'll go on to describe like humor will say stuff like about how there's you're having experiences. There seems to be an indication that there's some distinctive type of phenomenology, and there are often comparisons to perception. There are a few cases of people actually saying, like, literally, we have moral perception. You can literally perceive moral facts, but usually they don't seem to mean it in quite the literal sense of perception. But there does seem to be claims about there being some distinctive type of phenomenology to intuitions, and they're often described as appearances or seemings. Intellectual seemings is a common way that humor describes them. And I've surveyed people on my YouTube channel. Not that I haven't run an actual study on this, so take it with a pound of salt. But I don't have experiences of an intellectual seeming. Like, I don't have any special experience when I consider philosophical matters. So I don't know what they're describing, but it does sound like it might be in the dubious category.
Right. I mean, I think it would be very hard to come up with kind of token phenomenological counterpart for the notion, right? Like if you said like what's it like to believe that P or something, I can't really describe that to you if you don't know what it's like. You'd be lost if you didn't know what I meant, and I had to describe it to you. We'd never be able to do that. So is it any different here? I mean, like, is there something about seemings in particular that's different from belief that I mean, are we on shared ground if we talk about belief? Do
I reckon there'll be a difference, but just maybe on that point, Alex. So even this is where when I've thought about this seeming like say something where I would say I have an intuition that and this is actually a false intuition, by the way, but I have an intuition that all triangles have interior angles of 180 degrees, right? And it's false because on a curved surface they don't. But as I sort of like interrogate that as I bring it up in my mind, whatever that means, it's not just the fact that I couldn't like communicate whatever is kind of going on there. It's even that I don't think that there is like a necessary experiential aspect. So I think that I produce, like I produce intuition language, but with all sorts of different experiences sort of like co-occurring, or even sometimes like no experience at all. Like I might just almost be on autopilot, like saying something and
right.
like being,
but like what it means, it seems, is that like being in the state of whatever, believing the P or something isn't a claim about having certain types of phenomenal experience. It's not like if I say seeing red, where like the content of that just is some kind of like phenomenal content, like some qualia existing or whatever, however you cash that out. But if you say believing the P, it doesn't necessarily mean any mental state is taking place, like explicitly. I think I don't really know what it means, to be honest, but like it seems less tangible than just like some kind of logical positivist reduction to some experience that you have or whatever, right? I feel like I could believe that P, even if I don't. Sorry, like very last thing. It's just that I feel like I could believe that P, like if I'm asleep or whatever, if I'm completely dreamless sleep, and I still believe that P, in which case no experience is happening whatsoever, and it's still true. So it can't be. Is there some like strong way of ruling out that it's like related?
I would say from our context of evaluation, you would believe that P, but my view would be like you're not. It's true that you believe it if you're evaluating that from like a different stance or something, but to believe something is, I would say, to like the act of assenting to it. In my view, like that different theories will say different things. I think though maybe this is what it gets into. There's a separate thing maybe about when someone intuits something. Is there like a special sensation of certainty or something like that, and is that like a truth tracking sensation? And but I agree with what you're saying, that then you ask the claim, it seems quite transparent. So let's strip away the intuition thing and just look at like beliefs, right, generally. And my view has increasingly become that there's something interesting going on here. And I think that what it comes down to is a few things, one of which is propositions, and one of which is compositional semantics. And the other one is that the idea of like meanings as having, like say like concepts having like aboutness and things like that. And I think that in this view of semantics, because meaning isn't your, language use expresses, a proposition or expresses a meaning if these views of semantics are true. So your meaning something isn't equivalent to your use of a word. Your meaning is a mental something, right? It's it's either a component of a proposition that is composed according to grammatical rules, whatever, or it's a full sort of like truth apt expression, in which case there's maybe some account of like correspondence between that proposition and the world, reality, whatever. And I think that actually there must. I think like feel free if you think that there's a mistake I'm making in this analysis, but my view has increasingly become that for these like representational views of semantics to be correct, the content of the claim to me seems that there is actually some experiential aspect to semantics, because it's like it's like whether the meaning is in the head, whether it's semantic internalism or externalism, for these views of semantics, like there's like an experience of having that meaning correctly that then determines the use, because you have the correct use is determined by having the right proposition. Does that build on what you said, or do you think that's right or wrong or something? I don't know.
I mean, so it seems to me that like semantics, like the type of semantics where they reduce everything down to tokens of experience is kind of old-fashioned and out, isn't it? Like that's what I would say is like logical positivism, where the meanings of terms always boil down to like, the scientist sees the path in the cloud chamber or something, and that's the actual ground level of what the data is that they go on to analyze.
Sorry, maybe I mean something different than experience. I don't mean experience as in like a sensation, but it is some kind of mental thing. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not because if it's not the act of using the language, it's some mental. Do you like, or would you disagree there? Because if the meaning is equivalent to the use of the word, then that would to me seem to eliminate a metaphysical account of like a proposition as corresponding, because then language is a behavior, right? Which is just to say like the view that I sort of like lean towards, just because I've not been
like
able
a sort of Wittgensteinian view or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. Well, I thought that, so my understanding of what Wittgenstein's up to, so early Wittgenstein is like Godfather logical positivist, right? The Tractatus is the logical positivist Bible. They all revered early Wittgenstein, all those Carnap and those guys. But then Wittgenstein just like, I don't know, just went off and did something else for 20 years and then came back to philosophy and was like, wait, what's going on? You all think that, I think this now, and just wrote this. Well, never really wrote it, right? They were just notes or whatever from lectures.
There's a whole bunch of stuff in between those. So, like, for example, there's one key detail, for example, is that he had a debate with this Italian economist about language. And this is in his diaries as like a key point as a change in his thought. There's a whole bunch of things that I think influence his change in thought. But one of them is that in a conversation about something, let me find the exact example. It will just take me just so I don't like misrepresent it. So I put it in this, and just so I can read it actually, Lance, I'm just going to share my screen for a second. This is in a post I wrote the other day on Substack, and it was about representations and things. Where was it? Oh yeah, so here it is. So this is from Ray Monk's Duty of Genius. And he says, a non-bourgeois thinker whose profound influence on Wittgenstein's development dates from this first year back at Cambridge so this is when he's come back to Cambridge, Piero Straffa. Straffa was a brilliant Italian economist of broadly Marxist persuasion and a close friend of, I don't know who these people are, so it's not really helping. Straffa was invited by Keynes to come to King's to pursue his work, and a lectureship in economics at Cambridge was created specifically for him. Upon being introduced to Keynes, he and Wittgenstein became close friends, and Wittgenstein would arrange to meet him at least once a week for discussions. These meetings he came to value even more than those with Ramsay. In the preface to the Investigations, he says of Straffa's criticism, "I'm indebted to the stimulus of the most consequential ideas of his book." This is a large claim, and considering their widely differing intellectual preoccupations, a puzzling one. But it is precisely because Straffa's criticisms did not concern details, because one might say he was not a philosopher or mathematician, that they could be so consequential. Unlike Ramsay, Straffa had the power to force Wittgenstein to revise not this or that point, but his whole perspective. One anecdote that illustrates this was told by Wittgenstein to both Norman Malcolm and von Wright. These are some of his students and literary executors, and has since been retold many times. It concerns a conversation in which Wittgenstein insisted that a proposition and that which it describes must have the same logical form or grammar, depending on the version of the story. To this idea, Straffa made a Neapolitan gesture of brushing his chin with his fingertips, asking, "What's the logical form of that?" This, according to the story, broke the hold on Wittgenstein of the Tractarian idea that a proposition must be a picture of reality it describes. So, and I actually think that I found out a detail about where some of our notion of representations in philosophy of mind comes from in a book by PMS Hacker, where he was talking about Descartes, like how Descartes comes up with a Cartesian geometry, but he also is using algebra at the same time. And he comes up with, he decides that there can be resemblance without representation. and then he kind of packs that into representations. Also, there can be representation without resemblance. So the algebraic form and the Cartesian graph, they represent the same problem, but the algebraic expression and the graph, they don't actually resemble one another in terms of like a map to a terrain or something. And he bakes that language into his way of thinking about mind and mental representations and things. And I think that it's this idea of questioning what this representation is supposed to be, what's the sense in which it resembles. And if you observe language, as Straffer seems to have done with Wittgenstein here, that seems to have shaped his views, there actually seem to be all kinds of uses that are meaningful, but are not. It's not clear the way in which they represent or picture. Like even like what I'm kind of like stuff like I'm doing with my hands, whatever. You might say, well, that's not like a proposition, but we can kind of find some examples, that aren't that sort of thing. So I rambled about a bunch. I got all.
Well, I like the later Wittgenstein stuff a lot. And when I was younger, I was like when I was an undergrad, if you'd asked me about it, I would have told you that I was Wittgensteinian, latter Wittgensteinian kind of investigations level. And I think I sort of came back and started to think about analytic philosophy afterwards, and started to sort of do it with that as a background. So I think I always took the possible world semantics and the Bayesian whatevers as just like language games that are like in some respect fun to play and sometimes like illuminating about things, but they're kind of just games that you play, like Sudokus, or where you just learn how to play them. And I think that is like that perspective is sort of, it's a bit sort of non-serious, right? I'm not like taking it all to be drilling into reality and discovering truths and some big project like that, but it's more like different types of things, like active, like games-ish things that you can do with other people to differing degrees of seriousness. Because often doing philosophy is extremely light-hearted and funny, and you're like lots of it's sort of absurd and like it's almost jokes and playing around with ideas in the same way that you do in your freestyling jokes with one another and things. It's like the same part of your brain, I think, is going on there. So I approach it like that. And then anyway, my point is that like what's I think difficult for some people to appreciate is that like doing it like that and then confronting people who are like apologists, or I don't know, people on the internet who just do philosophy of religion all the time, they kind of seem to presuppose that what you must be doing is engaging in this super serious like a dispute debate thing where one of you is going to prove that God exists, and this will have all these supreme metaphysical consequences and you must change your life, etc., etc. Like the purpose of the apologist is to change your lifestyle, right? That's what they're actually trying to do. So it's super serious for them. But then from my point of view, it's more like all of this stuff to some extent is just you have to put a hat on and sort of like, let's play this game, the possible worlds game, or the representational semantics game, or whatever. You never really know whether any of it is meaningful at all. I mean, it could all of that could just be nothing. I mean, it could just be like moving chess pieces around on a board. Or it could all be latching onto reality completely, and it's super profound. And you just don't really know. And I think you have to approach philosophy like that. Like, maybe it's a worthwhile pursuit. Maybe it's not. You're doing it anyway.
I'm very sympathetic to what you're saying in the sense of, like, I'm perfectly fine when people are approaching philosophy in that way, and I agree. Like, my entire sort of my problem is really stemming from the fact that there are people who want to say that they're doing more than that, or like, I'm the most important person in the world because I've got these metaphysical claims to tell you. I've got to revise all of our political systems and theological systems, and everyone has to follow me and believe, like, and everyone has to listen to me because this is the most serious thing. And I'm going to tell the scientists how to do science, and I'm going to tell people evolution's wrong, and I'm going to, all of these sorts of things are what really winds me up, because then I'm going to be like, look, you've got this house of cards that isn't even built on anything at the bottom, and you're telling everyone else how to, how they've got to live, kind of thing. But yeah, insofar as you're like, well, this is actually fun and interesting, and I can be playful with it, and maybe occasionally I can kind of clarify something for someone in a field where there's a conceptual error. Maybe you're a physicist and you don't really think about infinities a lot, and someone's coming up to you and telling you've got to believe something on the basis of conceptual accounts of infinity, conceptual arguments around infinity, and I can tell you, here's actually you don't have to think about it that way. This is a conceptual problem, or fine tuning or something. And yeah, I think that those are potentially good uses of philosophy, or clearing up like methodological disputes, or the ways that language, like assumptions that might be being built in, bad arguments, methodology, all those things like can be super valuable things philosophy can offer and can be fun. But then there's just some people who are like, no, I've intuited myself to God's eyes point of view, and now I'm gonna like tell the world how to do it, sort of thing.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think that there's that idea of philosophy being as a kind of, and sorry, I know I'm jumped on this conversation and I feel like I've taken over. I apologize, but I feel bad already. But just let me finish this one thought whilst it's in my head, was just that like there's this idea of philosophy as kind of being like a butler to other sciences or whatever, where if they come across like either biology, they're like, what is life? Oh, let's ask the philosopher to clear this up for us now. And they just come in and sweep up or whatever and leave again and let the science continue. There's some idea that that's the role of philosophy. It's just sort of conceptual butler that helps you out when you need them. And I think that's a role. That's part of what philosophy is. I also think that on the side of that is there's this kind of like ideas playground thing where it's like there's a place where you can talk about a subject matter and it's like not really defined enough. There's no empirical basis to any of it yet, kind of thing. Might all be bullshit, might be the next big thing, you don't know. But they just sit in this kind of place where there's no science that encapsulates it. And then at some point someone figures something out or whatever, and it promotes it out of the playground of ideas into like pre-science school or something, where it's starting to build its own methodology and empirical basis and blah blah blah, and it goes off and becomes mathematics or whatever, and like, but originally it was just people doing stuff where it wasn't clear if that was even meaningful. They were just kicking ideas around kind of idly or for fun, or trying things out, not knowing what to do, blah blah blah. So I think that like philosophy just is in some ways just the ideas playground, and because of that you don't know if what you're playing with is going to go on to become a fully founded science of everything, or if it's just going to be complete word salad that doesn't mean anything, right? That's like when you're in that place, the ideas playground, that's when it's all completely unclear. I like that. I think that's the fun thing about philosophy. But
yeah, I like that as well. Sorry, Lance, you've not talked for a while. So.
Yeah, I'm looking at the clock and feeling my brain is shriveling with the need for food. So I'm going to have to get going soon anyway. So actually, it's a good thing that you took over to talk, because my ability to say anything reasonable quickly declines when I get hungry. I just get increasingly angry. So I'm sympathetic to a lot of the picture that you're describing there. And one of the things that frustrates me is that if philosophers have the self-awareness to realize they're engaged in a kind of recreational game, they're doing intellectual Sudoku or something, that's fine. I'm not that interested in that. But if people want to do that, people play video games, I'm cool with that. You do what you like doing. And then there's the potentially like applied side, where we're going to take some of this philosophy and leverage it. We're going to act like butlers. That's what I want to do. I want to go be a butler. What I don't like is when people don't fall into either of those categories. And as Nathan was describing, these people that think that everything they're doing is of the greatest importance of all. They're not doing any of the practical butler stuff, but they seem to think that they are. They seem to think the world of their philosophies that have no method of applying them to anything. And this is something that worries me so much about the direction that some of contemporary analytic philosophy has taken, and it's certainly not all of it. I don't know how much of the video that you're referring to you had listened to, but I was giving examples of analytic philosophers whose work I like quite a bit. But this intuition thing, at least talk of intuitions has just skyrocketed in contemporary philosophy. So, Herman Capellan talks about this in Philosophy Without Intuitions, where he tries to defend the rather bold thesis that philosophers historically, as a matter of method, don't really use intuitions for arguments. And a lot of people have been critical of that. A lot of people have dismissed it. Maybe a lot of people don't even know that he's done this. But there's been uptick in the use of that term. But never mind that. The question ultimately is, what are philosophers trying to do? I mean, analytic philosophy is not that old. And, it's gone through phases, much as the sciences go through phases. You had the heyday of logical positivism and ordinary language philosophy. And it's gone through these various stages of its life. But all through that, there's been a persistent strain of this non-empirical and sometimes hostile towards empirical approaches in certain ways, rationalist approach to philosophy, where, it's not like I think everybody's got to be out there with beakers and magnifying glasses. I do think that a lot of work can be done from the armchair, but there still seems to be these vestiges of the vestiges of Western philosophical influences in Plato or whatever, that are influencing the way that philosophers think about, frame, and approach issues that I think they're not getting them anywhere. And this has somehow proliferated in contemporary analytic philosophy, these appeals to intuition, where they treat themselves as having these special, it's almost like a sensus divinitatis. It's like they think that they have a special ability to detect truth, and it's quasi-perceptual, and they could see truths. And that, I think, is a very harmful way of thinking about philosophy. I don't think it's going to get them anywhere. They're not going to be able to serve as a butler because this is pseudo-psychological nonsense. And because they think they really have these faculties, they don't take themselves to be engaged in a recreational game. They're dead serious about this stuff, and it's not going to go anywhere. And that bothers me.
Yeah, I think it's actually quite interesting, because maybe then we made this distinction between the butler role of a philosophy and kind of playground role actually maybe part to amplify that distinction, what's going on is that, like, in the playground, it's more like they're sort of constructing arguments and testing them out sort of for fun. Like that's the game, So I'll just say, I've got this new argument for modal realism. Check me out. Premise one, blah blah blah, and then you're going to try and dispute those premises, and that's what we're doing. That's the game we're playing. And in those circumstances, it's sort of what I was saying before about, like, sometimes you got this pragmatic appeal to intuitions where you just go, we both like premise one, so let's just move on to the second one, kind of thing. And that you can just say, we find that intuitive, so we move on to the second one. That's that use of intuition there. And maybe what's going on is that, like, they are playing that game and it works like that, but the sort of butler to science idea, it can't really work like that, because essentially what's going on in that paradigm is that, like, there's a scientific issue that's cropped up that's not immediately clear how to sort of adjudicate what's going on. Like a conceptual issue has been brought up, like interpretation of quantum mechanics or something, and then, like, it's not clear that you can just empirically settle it, and you need a philosopher to come in and sort of help ground clear for you. And what they're going to do there is sort of set out a bunch of things and go, here's how the concepts sort of work in this area. If you modify this bit over here, this is what that means over in this other part of the theory or whatever. And they're, like, showing you around the theory and helping you out with it or something. But that's, like, the game is different. They're not advancing an argument as such, trying to convince you of a specific conclusion. And therefore the appeal to intuition doesn't really make sense when you're butlering. Like, it's not like we've got some intuition we want to skip over, so let's just agree we both find it intuitive. The butler's just trying to explain the landscape sort of neutrally. It's more like a civil servant talking to a politician, right? Where the politician has to make a call about what policy choice to make, and the civil servant's laying out, well, if you cut taxes by this much, that'll mean this will happen or whatever. That's what philosophy is doing here for the scientist, right? They're not recommending an option, they're not arguing for an option, they're not appealing to some shared intuition. They're just saying, here's what will happen if you do this thing. So maybe that explains it to some extent. Like, that's just the different, like, what are you doing when you're doing philosophy? Are you trying to help someone who's doing science, or are you trying to kick ideas around for fun?
Just
And
one
like,
thing though on the playground idea, Alex, is is that I really like this, because this is increasingly how I'm also thinking of science as well, as a partly, I've got this from Feyerabend's Against Method, like partly as a kind of anarchic process, and then there's sort of like these selection pressures that are put on things by like political and social context, but sort of like the aims of a field, which might be to do some particular type of thing. And so there's kind of like a natural selection almost on your theories then, and then your random mutations of the creative process of people coming up with different theories. And maybe that's where you're sort of saying this playground thing of what philosophers are doing has this cool role it can play that is maybe a little bit different even to what people purely in the confines of a theory can do, because in the confines of a discipline can do themselves, because they're so inducted into that field that they might not recognize maybe like conceptual confusions that a philosopher might spot, or certain things that might be a little bit different. I'm on board with and like that. The one thing that I think that philosophers are not cautious about here, like for example with the question modal realism that you brought up, is asking like what's at stake here, or what would it mean if this is true, right? Like, so like what does this do for us if it's true? And I think that the reason is because of some of these semantic analyses and correspondence accounts of truth. People are like, well, my sentence would just correspond to the world or something. Like, what does that mean for human affairs, or why is that something anyone should So insofar as I like the playground idea, I like it because we're at the end, we're still kind of connected to bubbling up theories that are connected to human practices that do something, but then I think that there are certain types of claims philosophers might make which are just completely unconnected from like human concern. Like the only concern that they're connected to is having a conversation that goes nowhere, for some sorts of things, and I don't like that, because I'm not interested. Well, just because I'm not interested in it. But like I say, like other people could be interested in it, and that's fair for them.
absolutely. Is Lance gone? I can't see him.
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
He's out of sync maybe or something, but yeah, he's here.
Okay,
No,
cool.
I'm here. I'm still here.
Good. Well, I think I might also call it a night though, because it's getting increasingly late as well for me.
Yeah.
And I'm
All right. Well, it was great to have you here. I think that added a lot to this, because I'm starting, like I said, mentally flag. So to get someone else's input, I think is really valuable, and I appreciate it.
Okay, cool, nice. Well, happy to help. I'll talk to you gents soon.
Yeah, see you around.
Right.
And also, obviously, you're tomorrow doing your skydive Phil Jordan Peterson thing, so people can look forward to
that's
that.
tomorrow.
Well, yeah, we're recording it tomorrow. I guess Phil will probably stream it like in the week. But yeah, we've got Danny on to comment on the video as we go through it as well. So it should be quite fun.
Cool. That should be good.
Yeah. Okay. Nice one. All right. See you in a bit.
Take care. All right. I'm gonna have to get going because my brain is not working. it's done.
Don't worry,
I don't
Lance,
know
you
why.
go get the glucose. Yeah. This is how I felt at the start of the conversation when I'd just woken up. Oh, sorry, your camera's gone out of sync with me, so I'm not intentionally interrupting. I just can't like see any visual cues of when you want to talk.
Well, that's all the more reason to cut it short then. So that was cool having him pop by and talking about intuitions, but my brain doesn't work. So I think that was a lot of fun for me, just covering a big range of topics. I don't know. I feel pretty energized. So I'll probably be doing a couple more streams in the next few days. And I'm working on a blog post responding to that Twitter exchange with Matthew about the stuff about saying you're confused, you got to trust the expert type stuff. He didn't exactly say you got to trust the experts, but you should expect the experts to be right. I find something really frustrating about that. I guess I will say something about that. Regarding unintelligibility, one of the things I find really frustrating about this is that what Matthew and many others will do is they'll say stuff like, look, lots of smart, well-informed people are using these concepts. Don't you think it'd be a little odd to think that what they're saying is nonsense? No, I don't think so. And I'm supposed to be intimidated by like what? A shield wall of smart people? Like what are they going to do? Throw their like GRE scores at me and their GPAs and I'm going to fold? It no, I don't defer to people because they're smart. I'll defer to them when they give me a good explanation. So, there are cases, because a lot of times, like when people are talking about this stuff, is they'll say, oh, well, just because you don't understand it doesn't mean there isn't something to be understood. But the standards I use to determine whether something is capable of being understood isn't do a bunch of people claim that they understand it. That's not good enough. So, take almost anything. I don't know shit about sound equipment. I don't know how this thing works. I don't know how the camera works. I don't know how computers work. I don't know. Might as well be freaking magic to me. I have no look. I push a button and the screen goes on. Look, I could do this. Holy shit! How does that? I don't know how that works. I have no idea I couldn't if you put me in a time machine and I went back 10,000 years and I was like, we got like a screen thing with the phone and a TV, and then they were like, whoa, that's amazing. How does it work? I'd be like, oh magnets, batteries. There's batteries and electricity, and then they'd be like, "What's that?" Like batteries, like a energy box with chemicals or something, and like the electricity. It's like like lightning. It's like that, and they're like, "So you have a box with lightning in it? What the hell are you talking about?" Like I would sound like an idiot. I don't know how anything works. So does that mean do I just go around going, I don't know how phones work. This is impossible. It's an impossible object. There's no way this could exist because I don't get. Ugh. Like, what do they think that when I say I think this is nonsense, that I'm that stupid, that I think this? I don't understand it. Me personally, therefore, it does not make sense. Why would I make an inference like that? That would be idiotic. I don't understand how most things work. I don't understand most of what mathematicians are talking about. I don't assume mathematics is unintelligible. I don't understand if I take my car to the mechanic and they say something about head gaskets and carburetor. I don't. They could say that there was a disequilibrium in the positronic harmonic wave oscillator, and I would be like, "Great, did you fix it? Okay, how much is that?" I don't know what they're talking about. I have no idea. Do you know why I think that they know what they're doing? Because when I drive out of the damn shop, my car works.
Yes. Yeah.
Because if they didn't know what they were doing, they wouldn't have all these great Yelp reviews. Because if they didn't know what they're doing, they wouldn't be licensed to do what they're doing. It's because of the fruits of their labor. That's how I know that they know what they're talking about. So how do I know that chefs know what they're doing? Because they serve me food and it's good. How do I know that a person is a chess master? Because they kick my ass every time. Actually, anybody could kick my ass every time. But they could kick another person that could kick my asses every time. You know what I mean? There's like a chain of people. A person that's better than me and they're worse than someone else and they're worse than somebody else. That person beats all those people. So there's all these ways of external corroboration of the person's knowledge and understanding of the topic in question, right? This is true for art. So I can tell if a person knows that they're doing it. Like if someone says I could draw a picture of your face, do it. And then they could do it. And then if the picture is like a stick figure, I'm like, okay, maybe you suck. Maybe you're pretending. But if they do this like amazing portrait of my face with like pencils and stuff, okay, they know how to do that. So in all of these cases, there's more than just everyone agrees. Now imagine if there were people that said they know how to do good art. And I said, okay, how do I know that those people know how to do good art? And I'm told all the artists agree that they do good art. And I'm like, can I see the art? And they're like, no. Just trust us. They can do good art because we agree they do good art. Would you believe that they did good art just based on that? No, unless you had access to art by other people that you could see. And then the artist will say that art is good. And you look at that and you're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But if, imagine I discovered that all these artists, there's like all these art galleries full of like stick figures and people that just like poop on a piece of paper or something. And they say that's all great. Okay, then I don't trust these art evaluators. I don't trust them. So unless there's some external means of verification that's available to me, the fact that a bunch of experts, a bunch of people that claim to be experts, purport to understand the concept is not good evidence that they understand the concept. Here's a few issues. One, how do I know that they have the same concept? They're using the same words. How do I know they have the same concept? What else? What else? So I don't know if they even have the same concept. Do they have any external means of corroborating the fact that they have the concept and that they understand it? No, they have nothing. These concepts are often primitive or unanalyzable or properly basic. They can't connect them to other concepts. They can't explain what they mean by the terms that they're using. They have no external means of corroborating them. You can't do anything with these facts. So if they were true, they fail basic pragmatic tests for what difference they would make. They wouldn't make any difference. So like one test you could ask is, let's say I went through my whole life and I ignored external reasons. Would I ever observe any difference in principle? I think the answer is no. So they could make no actual observable difference to me in principle. That's weird. So these things are real and you know what they are, but they can never make any difference. Something weird going on there. So there's a variety of considerations here. But principally among them is that I don't consider them to be experts in having and understanding concepts of the relevant kind. So when Matthew says these experts have the concepts, I mean, okay, I could find a group of people that are like experts at fishing, and they're experts, and they could all
they can prove it. They can pay the check. They can bring dinner to the table. Yeah.
Oh, sure. But I mean, what if a bunch of fishers are like expert fishermen or fisher people or whatever, like a bunch of expert people at catching fish purport to be experts at having a certain kind of philosophical concept?
Yeah, right.
I'm not going to buy that they have the expertise at having the concept because they don't have the relevant kind of expertise.
Yeah.
So I'm not denying philosophers are experts at philosophy. They're experts at logic. They're expert at analyzing philosophical texts. They're expert at drawing out conceptual distinctions. That does not mean that they're experts at having concepts or understanding unanalyzable concepts. So I just deny that they have the relevant expertise. Now, if Matthew wants to say, no, they are experts at that, prove it. Why should I grant that they're experts? So I don't acknowledge their expertise. Look, take the case of would we trust, if I gave the astrology example before, if there was a convention of astrologers and we asked them, hey, are you all experts on astrology? What do you think they're going to say? If we ask astrologers, are they experts?
They would say that they're experts. Yeah.
Right. So are they experts at astrology?
Well, it's like the etic. If you're in that in group, it depends what you would say about that. This is where it kind of gets a little bit question begging, right? Because how you would answer that depends on what you believe about that in the first place. So if you're not someone who believes in astrology, you would say no, they're not experts, right? Because there's no relevant sense of expertise here where astrology is connected to a practice that actually works or something like that. Whereas, if you believe it does, you'd say no, of course the astrology, or you could even say it's analytic that they're the experts in astrology, but then it's a pseudoscience because it doesn't correspond. Like there's a number of avenues people could respond to this.
There's a variety of ways that you could explore this, but the bottom line is none of us ought to defer to like the astrologers at the astrology conference for like making life decisions or
exactly
personalities,
right.
Because astrology is bullshit. And so if I reject the methods, like if I reject Matthew's metaphilosophy and the metaphilosophy of the people purporting to have these concepts, why would I grant that I should think that they have the concepts? Like conditional on me buying into the methods Matthew's using, I agree with him. I should defer to their expertise. Yeah. Maybe there's a problem with me, but I don't condition my beliefs on Matthew being halfway correct. Why the hell would I do that? That's insane. That's like if a Christian said, well, conditional on the Bible being the inerrant word of God. Yeah, fine. Then lots of Christian stuff follows. But that's the matter of contention. And so the matter of contention here, and I don't want to see someone play with words. I don't think philosophers have the relevant kind of expertise for them to be authorities on whether they have a concept and whether the concept is meaningful. I am, in virtue of that, not denying their expertise at logic and argument evaluation and reading Aristotle or whatever. They have lots of types of expertise. I don't think this is one of them. And I'm not like required at the outset of an exchange to grant that they have that kind of expertise. So Matthew is helping himself to assumptions that I don't accept. And then I'll make a final point about this, which is Matthew is also appealing to numbers here, right? He's not saying there's one really smart expert. He's saying, well, all the experts Jesus Christ. Does this really require me to have to explain why? I'm just going to be honest.
Anyone who isn't obviously wrong. Anyone who isn't obviously wrong and insane would say.
I guess I'm just hungry, but I'm very sorry. This is kind of dumb. This is kind of dumb. Does Matthew not understand the principle of garbage in, garbage out? If all of these philosophers are employing the same methods, which they are, and if it's in virtue of the induction into the use of those methods that's causing them to make a shared mistake, you have garbage in, garbage out. They're using bad methods and it results in a bad outcome. So the fact that lots of them have these beliefs is not a particularly good indication that the beliefs are true, for much the same reason if we found an isolated cult of 1,000 people living in a weird location, in a remote location, that all believe that like Lord Zordu is going to beam them up to heaven, that wouldn't be a good reason to think. Like, you wouldn't go, well, look, but you don't understand. It's not just one person that's an expert on Lord Zordu. It's thousands of them. Now, thousands of them.
Well, actually, there is an interesting point here, though. There's an interesting point here about meaning as use, right? Which is kind of like that there is a sense in which if all the competent speakers operationalized their terms about Lord Zordu, that we might actually become convinced of Lord Zordu ourselves. But it just depends on what our values were and our goals, and whether the adoption of that language within a linguistic community was required in order for us to achieve the sorts of things that we cared about in the communicative context that we're in. Do you see what I... Yeah, go ahead.
And there might be a sense in which I would be okay with that. Like, because, if you're a pragmatist, then truth is a moving target, right? And so truths in the past may not be truths today. And it's not that we discovered we were wrong and we now have new truths. No, it was true in that context, and it's not true in this context. So I'm fine with that. But Matthew's not going to buy into that. And I'm not going to presume to impose my philosophical preconceptions of what he's saying. I think what he's saying helps itself to preconceptions and views that I don't grant, and that don't seem to acknowledge the many, many reasons I have for doubting that what he and others are saying is meaningful. And at least part of it is part of the culprit is people like Matt Ulma and other people. I don't remember exactly what he said, so maybe it's not him. So if it wasn't, I apologize. They'll say, I don't understand what these realists are talking about. And that gives realists the leverage that they need. It gives them the fuel to say, see, you're saying I don't get it, so it's not intelligible. That's not what we should be saying. What we should be saying, and again, this is whether you agree with my position on the matter or not, we should be saying something like, I don't think you understand the concept, or I don't think this concept is capable of being understood. That is what should be said, because the issue here isn't that I'm saying I don't have the concept, because then Matthew could say, well, we, like me and my colleagues do. No. I'm saying Matthew doesn't have the concept. That's my claim. He doesn't have the concept. Now, what kind of evidence can Matthew and all these people that allege that they have this concept present? I'm not saying they have the concept, but they're mistaken. I am saying quite literally, they do not have the concept. They don't have the concept because there isn't a concept to have. So the claim is an empirical claim about their psychology. And they could say the onus is on me to present evidence for that. And I agree if they do. I do have an argumentative burden here. But what I don't grant is the lazy response that I'm just confused. Because I'm coming at this from such a different angle and such a different framework that I'm not required to buy into the assumptions that would make that such an easy, like they'd reach on the bottom shelf and just go, well, obviously, since we're experts and you're the outlier, you're the confused one. I'm denying that he has the relevant kind of expertise.
So I think that was very good, Lance, but I will say what was very funny is that about 30 minutes ago, you said, I'm very tired and my brain isn't working. And then you went on an epic rant.
Was that 30 minutes?
It was about 20 to 30 minutes, I think. Yeah.
I get animated by this stuff. It works me up. I want exchanges with the people that I disagree with to be respectful, and I don't think I've been very respectful, so I apologize. I do find it frustrating to not have my position appreciated for what it is and treated on its own terms, and for someone to just help themselves to the presumption that I'm an idiot. I don't like that, because on this topic, maybe there's people out there that think I'm an idiot on this topic, but I don't think that I am, and I don't think I've been given good reason to think that I am. And so it's real frustrating for someone to just be like, I just confused. If I'm confused, why am I confused? Come talk to me. And unfortunately, nobody that I've talked to about this concept of reasons can say anything that doesn't sound like total gibberish to me. So am I inferring it's gibberish because it sounds like gibberish to me? No. It's that there's a lot of ways that they could say and do things that would give me the impression that I'm making a mistake here. They could show, no, we do have the relevant kind of expertise. No, your metaphilosophical approach is wrong. No, there are ways of externally corroborating our competence on this particular issue. No, there are ways of externally corroborating the quality of our general metaphilosophical approach. And then downstream of that, it would follow that maybe we're right about this too. There's lots of things that they could do and that they could say, and they say absolutely none of those things. Instead, what I typically get is people being dismissive, smug, condescending. They brush off the idea. They say it's complete nonsense. They say stuff like, but lots of us have the concept, but I'm denying you have the concept. So just saying, but lots of us have the concept is question making. So they make these level zero moves that are just dismissive. It's annoying. It's annoying because I can't get a good conversation out of this. And if I'm wrong, I'd like to know why I'm wrong. And just dismissing me that's not going to help me. It's not going to help anybody. So it's tough.
Right. Well, I think we're coming up to 4 hours, Lance. I think you need glucose. I need glucose as well, and I need to go to bed. But yeah, I've enjoyed it. I think it was good. We've gone through a bunch of pretty interesting topics. I think made a bunch of good points that hopefully will edify and teach and clarify a bunch of things for a bunch of people. I'll try and put some timestamps in this one actually, because I think that because there's quite a few things we went through, it'd probably be good. If people have them, please leave them in the comments, mine and Lance's channels, because it's easier to do.
I'll post them on my channel too, because we both have versions of the video. And I got to come up with a thumbnail for this one. I don't know what that's going to look like. Okay, last thing then. Any suggestions in the chat for what I use for the thumbnail, given what we've talked about? And then that's it. I'm done.
Maybe we could have. Do you remember when Matthew converted, or didn't convert, but when he was like, wow, these incredible arguments converted me for theism, and he came up with a thumbnail of him going like that could be quite a good like that, but then with you and me or something.
Like me going.
No, that like the one of his video where he's like, but then it's like you and me.
Nah, I don't want to use a picture of him.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, I don't know then.
Yeah, someone said Peterson in the title will probably get more clicks.
Yeah, that's true.
That's true. All right, I guess I'll give it some thought.
Yeah, we'll see. Ask ChatGPT.
You know what? I am going to ask ChatGPT.
Awesome. Right. Well,
right,
thanks,
cool.
everyone.
All right. Oh, let me do an outro video. Wait, that's going to be weird on your channel, right?
Oh yeah, Lance's channel, by the way, is Lance Independent. I need to put the link. I've not set this up properly, but in the description.
Oh right, and I'll have to put a link to your channel in the description as well. But so go to both of our channels, like the video on both instances of the video, subscribe to both our channels if you didn't. Do all the things. Leave comments. So I engage with people in the comments. So do all that stuff and share the stuff around. All of the things.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Outro video time.
Awesome. Yeah, let's go.
All right, cool.